want to put any pressure on them, but everybody at home is watching.
All right, let's get started. I'm Nick Pilch. I'm Vice Chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I'm chairing this meeting since Mr. Donaldson, our chair, is absent. And this is the Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting of Wednesday, May 14th. And will you do a roll call, please?
Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. This is my first meeting, so be gentle on me. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It's like the king thing. Nobody starts the pledge until you do.
Okay, thank you. Roll call, please.
Yes, Commissioner Arkin,
Here?
Commissioner Eisenman. Here. Commissioner Moss.
Here.
Chair Pilch.
Here.
And for the record, Chair Donaldson is on vacation this week.
All right, next item on the agenda is the consent calendar, but it seems to be empty tonight. So I think we can move right along to item 5, which is public comment. And this is a portion of the meeting where anyone who wishes to speak on an item that is not on tonight's agenda may do so. Is anyone here in the public wishing to speak on a different matter? Seeing nobody, I think we can move on to the meat of the meeting. Discussions and possible action on the following matters. I see the first one is 957 Stannage, planning application 14-014. Which we reviewed in our last meeting, and it's come back to us. Staff, do you want to say anything about this?
Yes, before you this evening is the design review, conditional use permit, and a secondary dwelling unit at 957 Stannage. The subject lot is 4,800 square feet and contains a 1,561 square foot home. The applicant is proposing to lift the home to create legal ceiling height in the lower level, construct a new secondary unit, as well as living space for the main residence. The unit will be 406 square feet. And the lower level will include a new kitchen, living dining room. And the upper level will include 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a home office, and another family living room. Overall, the building height will increase to 23 feet, 7 3/4 inches. The home is craftsman in appearance and is proposed to remain, and 3 off-street parking spaces are provided in the 2-car detached garage and in the driveway. Previously, the Commission reviewed this on April 23rd, and at that time, the Commission continued the application to a date certain of May 14th, pending design changes by the applicant. In particular, the Commission was concerned about the front porch design and window consistency details. So, for your review this evening and in your packet, you were provided a revised set of plans. And up on the screen, we have the original submittal, which showed the front porch entrance for the main residence. The applicant has modified that and carried over that same roof line detail and supporting column to the other side to give it a more symmetrical appearance. In addition, the window schedule has been modified. The first floor dining room, which is at the northeast corner, has been changed to match the window, which will serve the second unit, which results in a more consistent appearance on the north elevation. And the first floor kitchen window, which is located at the southeast corner of the home, has been modified to provide proper alignment with the doors on the east elevation. So with that, we welcome any comments or questions you have. Certainly we recommend approval of the application, and the applicant and homeowner are here this evening to address you.
Did the applicant or applicant's representative want to make any comments at this time, or just let the plans stand as they are for now? Okay. Any questions by the Commission or staff or the applicant? Seeing none, I think we can open public comment. Does anyone here in the public wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the Commission for your comments. Would anyone like to comment?
I can start. I don't have my notes, which are
on a remote drive, and I need the internet, so I'm going to try to remember what I had written. But I wanted to thank the applicant for making the adjustments. I think they're a big improvement, and I think that you will enjoy pulling up to the house a lot more. And that's pretty much all I had to say.
Commissioner Arkin, Commissioner Moss, any comments?
Well, I'll go ahead and repeat my thanks of responding to some of the things we asked for. I think we were on the verge of approving this and just needed to see a little improvement on the front porch. I'll make a few notes on this project. It is only being raised 6.5 feet, and it's still more than 4 feet below the maximum height limit. They are adding a second unit, which is something we are inclined to encourage more and more. It meets all of our zoning codes. I think one small note, and this may be more of a drafting discrepancy than an intentional one. It looked like the north trellis was slightly shorter than the one on the south, and I think the two of those should match each other, and I suspect that that's the designer's intent as well. I do note that the south one has a cover over the door, and I think that's a prudent feature, so we certainly will allow that, and I think a similar one on the north could be optional if that were desired, and fit within the floor area ratio. But this project is completely in scale with the neighbors. Where the second unit entry is against a neighboring driveway, and it's screened by a big tree, and I think this project represents an affordable way to achieve a livable home and a second unit, so I support it.
Do you have any comments?
No, actually, I'm probably going to recuse myself because I'm not familiar with this and I don't have access to the plans at the moment. So.
We have Wi-Fi now.
Oh, you're right. It just came on.
Right.
Geez,
So you're not actually recusing yourself, are you? You're just stepping back from the discussion?
I'm going to recuse myself from voting on this.
Okay.
Which network?
Should be dinner with, is the City of Albany guest? And the
I didn't get a
password
chance
is
to
dinner with Albany 2010.
listen to the comments from the
lowercase.
last meeting, so I feel only fair
I
that.
usually have it stored. It's not coming up. I don't need it. I've got everything downloaded, but others may.
There we go. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Back to Steve. Well, I know I asked about recusal because I think recusal implies that you would actually leave the room and not be a participant. But I think you're actually going to abstain from the vote. Is that your intention? Okay.
It doesn't matter either recusal because I'm not taken involved in the discussion on the project. But it's too hot to leave.
Doing nitpicking. Okay. I don't think I have any comments. I think that the applicant has answered our concerns, has responded to our concerns, and I also support the project.
Okay, well, I will move approval of planning application 14-014, design review, conditional use permit, and secondary dwelling unit at 957 Stannage Avenue, incorporating all of the conditions outlined in the staff report, noting that the two front trellises over the entry porches should match in detail, and the owner has the option of putting a similar cover on the north one if it's within the floor area ratio.
Thank you for that motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? One abstention?
One abstention.
Okay, 3 ayes, 1 abstention. Thank you very much. And there's a 14-day appeal period, and after that, if it's not appealed, the application becomes finally approved. Thank you. Moving on to our next item, it is amendments to our planning and zoning codes applicable to citywide secondary residential units. Would staff like to make a report?
Yes, for your purposes this evening, we are requesting that the commission review the proposed draft amendments pertaining to secondary residential units in the Albany Municipal Code and adopt a resolution of intent to allow future amendments to Chapter 20 of the Municipal Code. We anticipate holding a second meeting on this topic at a later date once, pending your direction this evening, final changes are made, at which time you can make a formal recommendation to the City Council. On March 3rd of this year, the City Council adopted the 2007-2014 Housing Element. Chapter 6 of the Housing Element includes goals, policies, and action programs which are intended to carry out the adopted housing goals. In particular, Program 4B identifies amending the city's second unit regulations to facilitate the creation of additional second units within the city. These amendments are intended to implement this particular program. And the policy is designed to encourage the addition of small, more affordable housing units in Albany, just like the second unit you approved minutes ago. The amendments before you this evening include changes to the development standards, including height and setbacks, the parking requirements to be consistent with state law, and allowing second units in the R2 zone provided they meet the same standards prescribed for units in the R1 zone. Currently, there's a 12-foot height limitation, and this is actually specified in accessory buildings and not within the secondary units ordinance. This section of the code applies to all units, all secondary and accessory units, regardless of their use. We're recommending that we actually add that specificity with the second units regulation and take it out of, put it in there specifically rather than having it cross-reference. And in putting that together, staff did some research to assess height limitations in neighboring jurisdictions. So in your staff report, you have some information on other height restrictions. So for example, Richmond allows a height of 22 feet. El Cerrito allows a height of 15 feet. And Berkeley they have a 12-foot height standard, but they will also permit a height up to 24 feet if the setbacks are at least 10 feet from property lines. Existing regulations for detached units require that the setbacks from the rear and side yard property lines meet or exceed the minimum side yard requirements. With that, though, we have existing structures. Sometimes people are interested in converting existing garages into a second unit, and those units may not necessarily meet the setback requirements. So we're recommending that a side yard requirement of not less than 3 feet be applied across the board, which would give some flexibility in homeowners pursuing conversion of existing structures. Going back to the height issue, given the survey that we've done, we're also recommending that you allow a height of up to 15 feet, as that would give a little more flexibility. And certainly that can, the height can be adjusted based on the setback. So for example, if you wanted to allow greater height, you'd ask for a greater side or rear yard property setback. With respect to the parking issue, the code right now requires that there be 2 separately accessible parking spaces. Currently, we're out of compliance with state law. The state law allows for secondary unit parking to be within permitted setbacks or through tandem parking. This provision is also carried forward in neighboring jurisdictions for state law consistency. And I can tell you from working with property owners who seek to do a secondary unit, that's often the hindrance to them pursuing a project is the parking. For example, I've had actually two interested parties in the last week or so, basically waiting for this code change to go into place so that they can do the tandem parking and then proceed with an application later in the summer. So allowing that change would create greater flexibility. Last component of this, it allows secondary units in the R2 zone by right, provided they meet the same standards for the units as in the R1 zone. So there are several sections of the code where we would modify this provision to allow it across the board, which would allow then secondary units in the R2 zone by right. So with that, we welcome your feedback on the proposed changes. We're certainly happy to make any other changes you identify this evening, and at a later date, we will bring this back to you. Ideally, we'd like to bring this back in June so that we can get this wrapped up, since these policy changes are pretty straightforward and they also implement our housing element for the current period.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions from the commission of staff?
Go ahead.
So I was interested in clarification on the, if a unit is located within that 3 feet, are we saying that if it was within the allowable setback, they would then have to come before the Planning and Zoning Commission, or they would have to modify the building to meet that? How?
Well, I think the idea was to build in some flexibility. So last year, we brought to you an application. This was actually one of the things that got us thinking about this. We had a property owner who purchased a property with an existing detached structure. I believe his required setback for the side yard was 4.5 feet, and he was at 3 feet 8 inches. When we took it to the commission, basically we were given the direction that he could convert it because he had the required parking, he had proper separation between the main house and the detached structure. So allowing that flexibility would allow someone to convert an existing structure with a lot less cost. They're obviously paying for improvements to the structure, but they're not moving walls or pouring a new slab and doing ground-up construction.
So it sounds like they would have to come before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
Normally, they don't. Under state law, where it's a ministerial permit, we're not allowed to bring it to you. So we would have to create, and I think that is part of the
language that's to be modified.
Part of the incentive that people have for doing these things is that it's pretty low amount of effort on the front end. So I guess our preference would be to be able to continue to do that, basically an over-the-counter permit.
I think that would be mine too. I'm not sure. So you're saying that moving forward, if you had a garage that was right on the property line, you would have to still get, how would that work? Would you get?
If you had an existing condition like that, you would still have to get the second unit permit. I think, we can build in some flexibility if it's less than 3 feet. We just thought 3 feet was, because that's our minimum side yard setback right now.
And you need a 1-hour firewall.
And you would need a 1-hour firewall, no window openings.
I'll save my question on that same topic for discussion.
Yeah.
Can you remind us why we are proposing to allow second units in the R2 zone but not the R3? Was there any particular reason?
To tell you the truth, I don't recall any particular reason, and this came up because one of your earlier drafts actually did have it in the R3 zone, and then in the final adopted version, it came through as only R2.
One consideration, I'm not sure that was the reason, and I'm not sure it justifies it, but by having it as an by allowing second units in the R3, you're kind of precluding a more dense multifamily project, perhaps in the long term. I'm not saying that's a good argument, but that's one that could be made, that if you have an R3 piece of property, the ultimate vision is for a more dense development than a single-family home and a small accessory unit at the back.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would think that would be the one and only reason. And I know that through our housing element discussion, we were talking about making it easier to add units everywhere. So that might, and one could, within that zone, add more units. Okay. We'll get to that one too. I was just curious if you recall. Thank you.
I might want some clarification on that, because maybe it's simple-minded, but it's an R2, you're allowed 2 units.
Right.
So why would we say, whether it's inclusionary housing unit or I don't understand it, but maybe I can get that explained to me, because it's the same with an R3. We allow 2 units or 3 units in an R3 by right. In an R2, we allow 2 units by right.
Let's get into this after public.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I want to
Yeah.
get that. That's the question I'm going to need to get answered.
Okay. All right, sounds like it's time to start public comment. So I'll open the public comment. Does anyone from the public wish to speak to us on this item? Please come forward.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Alexa Hauser. I live on Taylor Street in Albany. I am delighted to see action on this item from the housing element. It's wonderful to see these things beginning to change, taking steps toward that. I'd like to make, I think it's 4 comments. One is that from what I read, and I'm not an expert like you all, but it seemed like the setbacks and height changes or flexibility made sense to me as a member of the public. So give you that feedback. And then I had a question about the off-street parking issue. So there was, at one point it was tied to 1 bedroom, and I wonder if that means that is a parking place for each bedroom. And I wonder if that means that a studio, is a studio a bedroom, or does it mean a separate bedroom? So I just had that question. And I noticed, I came up with this brilliant idea, and then I saw it in the next item, which is the amnesty thing. But I would really like to see added to this change in policy a bonus for people who are willing to make their unit an affordable unit for 10 years. That is not a restriction from requirements that are about safety, but perhaps less fees or that sort of thing. Because otherwise, I think there's not enough of an incentive to make these low to no income units, but rather, unless it's a family member who will live there, but rather to make them market rate. And the rents that were listed are pretty amazing rents. I mean, if I didn't own my house, I'd have trouble paying for a studio in Albany. So, and then my last question is, I didn't understand the recommendation for this to be categorically exempt from the CEQA around new construction or conversion of small structures. So that's perhaps my naivete, but I don't understand why we would want that. Thank you.
Good evening, Commission. Peggy McQuaid, Albany resident. Increasing the housing stock in Albany is a good idea for a variety of reasons. Among these, accommodating our fair share of the region's housing needs, allowing property owners on fixed or moderate incomes to supplement their income by renting out their unit or, in fact, living in a unit and renting the main dwelling. It also could encourage a more diverse community. Amending the code regarding secondary units will help with the implementation of the housing goals specified in the recently adopted 2007-2014 housing element. I'd like to encourage you, though, to also include an additional amendment allowing an owner to exceed or to reduce certain requirements contingent upon renting the unit at a level affordable to low or no income renters for a determined length of time, similar to that which the City of Piedmont has just recently adopted. With this amendment in place, I encourage you to adopt Resolution 2014-01, amending the Planning and Zoning Ordinance, updating secondary residential unit regulations. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Good evening, Catherine Sutton, Albany resident. I have nothing more intelligent to say than either of the last 2 speakers, but I wanted to let you know that I agree with them completely.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to Commission for discussion. First, I'd ask if staff would want to speak to any of the questions raised. There's a question I didn't quite get about bedrooms. I'm not sure if anyone caught that exactly.
Well, in some of our parking joint commission meetings, we've discussed the possibility of basing parking on bedrooms, but that's not currently
That's correct.
in the Albany ordinance, nor is it proposed here.
Okay.
I think the clarification is under the matrix under state law, which says 1 space per unit or bedroom. So state law says either a unit, which is a studio, or a 1-bedroom. So that might be the clarification, especially if we tend to lean towards state law.
Got it.
I think there was a question about CEQA and why this would be exempt, or why these projects.
Yeah, that was the other question.
Right. CEQA is state law that requires the city to do a thorough environmental review of projects that meet a certain threshold, and that review can also often take months, if not years. And so there are a series of exemptions, a couple of dozen exemptions for things that are, they're called categorical exemptions. They're assumed to not create an environmental impact, such as a small home addition, unless there's some unique circumstances. If it was in the middle of a wetlands or something like that, then it would be a different thing. So it's just it's a way to streamline the process for single family homes. I think 1 or 2 unit, maybe 3 units meet the categorical exemption standard. Then beyond that, we have to start doing environmental review.
Okay. Who would like to start with comments? Discussion.
I'll jump in.
Okay.
Well, I have a big exclamation point next to this item. This is wonderful that we are at the moment where we are implementing some of the things that have been discussed for the last few years. As I noted earlier, I support including the R3 zone as a place where these can be allowed, and I think my reasons are several. First, it represents an immediate way for one of those landowners to add a unit, and in many cases, especially with the smallest of lots that are in that zone, we probably yield more units this way than trying to move through an application. I don't think that a larger project is going to be hampered by a property that is slightly more valuable because it's had a unit on it. I think the benefit of allowing these outweighs the risk. The question of height came up, and units that are within the setback currently, or not units, I should say, but structures, which we have many garages or backyard offices, accessory buildings that folks are converting to accessory dwelling units or secondary dwelling units. And I'd like to propose, as I think I did in one of our earlier discussions, that we allow these secondary dwelling units to follow the same setback rules as our accessory buildings, which is that they can be either 3 feet away from a property line or in that 0 to 6 inch distance from the property line with an 8-foot 6-inch height at the edge, at the eave, at the property line, and then continuing at a 45-degree angle, which is what the code currently is for accessory structures. Provided that there's no fire department prohibition, I don't see any negative to allowing this. And in many ways, a blank wall right at the property line is preferable to a wall with windows in it 3 feet away. And I think most residents of Albany would agree. And by allowing these structures to be closer to the property rear and or side setbacks, we actually end up with more usable backyards. And with our small backyards, I think that would be an advantage. So I wanted to propose that we go a little bit further in that regard. I like the 15-foot height limit. I think that allows for people to have small lofts and other creative spaces within their unit. I would also support an exception for designs which are compatible with the main unit. So if someone has a 12 and 12 pitch on their front house, that they're allowed to have a similar roof on their back dwelling. And that would be on a case-by-case planning commission review basis. All for the tandem parking, and I think in many ways, by allowing that, we are creating a reasonable condition where we're requiring for the majority of the properties, that would be where the main house was built pre-1958, 1 parking space per unit, and that would bring us in line. I mean, we're already there. It now makes it just a little bit easier by allowing those in tandem. And then the last question I have, well, two questions. One is, why are we limiting the size? And as someone recommended, maybe there's a way that if a unit wants to be a little bigger, it can be made affordable for some period of time as a trade-off. And I think Sonoma County actually has a similar ordinance. It's 840 square feet or 1,000 square feet if you make it affordable. And then last question. We have a section in the ordinance that requires compatibility with the main unit on a number of items. They are architectural styles, siding material, roof shape, roofing material, trim material and design, window types, window and sill detail. And I'm wondering if we could just simplify that and say that it is in sync with our residential design guidelines, which allow for contrasting but compatible solutions rather than exact replicas. That's all for the moment.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you mentioned. I think that there's a couple issues that, this goes back to the clarification. On R2 or R3, thank you. On R2 or R3, you're allowed to have 2 units of any size. So increasing the square footage is only going to be in an R1 zone for the secondary unit. Because in R3, R2, R3, you can build up to what's allowed in the code, as long as you can provide the parking.
What did you just say?
As long as you can provide the parking.
Yeah, which is where
that's going in circles.
Second unit
Yeah.
might be more advantageous.
Right. But and again, in the second unit, it's a question of what size is really a second unit, because in state law, or our code, it's limited 632 or something.
650.
650. Whether we increase that, and I would think that we may want to look at increasing that in the R2 and R3 zones, and keeping it at 650 in the R1 zones, unless there's a lot coverage issue where they can't increase that unit, So I think we need to study the square footage a little bit more and maybe come up with something that works better. I agree. I think that, and this is the one that's the toughest one for me to wrap my head around, was the 0 lot line, or the 6-inch lot line, allowing residential units within the 3 feet or within the setback. I agree there's a lot of good points about larger backyards, lots of better usable area. It just gets down to a concern of roof and impact on the adjacent neighbors. And so that's where I was hoping we would come to some discussion that if you're within that 6 inches to 3 feet, that the flat roof or a very sloped roof would be used. If you want to go beyond that, then you can go to a higher slope roof or design. And that way you are kind of minimizing the impact to the neighbors right against the property line.
And do you think that what we currently require, the 8-foot 6-inch and then continuing at a 45-degree angle, is sufficient?
I don't know why we came up with 8.6. I think we had to raise it to 9 feet, which gives you an 8-foot interior.
Yeah.
So yeah, in that case, my concern is that we start getting into a loft situation in some of these units where the ceiling or the slope gets big enough that you can actually slip in a loft sleeping area. Might be a great idea if it's not exposing the neighbors to the impact from having a sleeping loft. And it doesn't take a lot of room. I did one in Berkeley. Thank you, Amnesty. But it had a sleeping loft in it. It was very small on the ceiling, and it was like 6 feet. So it did work out, and I think that was a very nice, where you had a downstairs, which actually was a living area, a usable studio, and then a little sleeping loft. So I think that my concern is, I think we need to look at that roof slope issue and kind of understand what we're proposing and how it impacts. So that's one concern. The other concern, it's surprising that what we're saying is we're circumventing Prop D here, or Measure D, which requires.
No, we're not.
I know, it gets down to state law, let me finish. It gets down to state law, which on an inclusionary or secondary residential unit is allowed to have only one parking spot, and that parking spot can be tandem with the one for the main house. What I'd like to see us do is drop the age of the house as far as requiring 1 or 2 parking spots, and just right across the board require 1 parking spot for the existing house and not give it an age. So drop the age,
Well, if I may.
Sure.
The age, the pre-1958,
Yep.
1958 to 1978, and
Yeah.
then post-1978 came straight out of when Measure D was enacted.
Right.
And applying the zoning requirements that were in place at those times.
I understand.
And I don't know that we can change that without what we were discussing at our other
Right.
committee, which is taking it to a vote of the public. I
Yeah.
think what this does is it takes that lowest, most common denominator, which are properties where the main house was built pre-1958, where 2 parking spaces are required, and says that those 2 parking spaces may be in tandem, whereas our ordinance currently says
Side by side.
side
right.
by side.
No.
And I don't think this has anything to do with state law. I think it's
No.
us changing our ordinance.
Right, no, it's actually out of sync with state law.
Yeah.
But my point being that I understand it's in Measure D, but I think that was disingenuous in the fact that how many new houses do we have like this, as opposed to what percentage of the house gets remodeled that then doesn't qualify for the older house status. So we get into that argument all the time. Is it 50% that you get a remodel house or add to the house that then does not qualify for the previous exemption it may have had? So I think that gets into, and we all know how many houses have been added on to and redesigned and rebuilt in Albany. So I think that we need to clean that part of it up. And whether we have to go back to Measure D or we interpret the state law more directly here. And I'm not advocating either way, because I know that's an issue, but I think that right now our code is confusing. My house was built in 1911. I remodeled it. Does it really still qualify? I don't know. I think that we also, there was the, oh, sorry. There we go. I think that the issue, I think is very interesting about a secondary residential unit qualifying for an inclusionary unit. I think 10 years is not enough. But I think that what kind of exemptions are bonuses per se? I mean, we give bonuses for inclusionary housing for, multiple units. Can we kind of figure out a way to give some type of bonuses to inclusionary housing that are registered? And the issue is, unfortunately, the city's going to have to monitor it, because houses turn over here, and then all of a sudden somebody goes, I got a secondary residential unit, and I can rent that out for $1,800, $2,000 a month. So it's going to have to be registered with the city and registered on title as an inclusionary unit. So I would like us to take a look at somehow coming up with some bonuses that we can give for people who want to do the inclusionary housing for a secondary unit. And that may be as much as reducing the parking, and so they would present us with justifications for these bonuses they would receive.
It may be we model it on what was the state ordinance, which is that you get to choose whichever one is most advantageous to you, whether it's size or height or a parking space.
Right. And those are great starts, but I think that we can also look at setbacks, whether we go to that 3 feet or that 6 inches. So.
Well, that one I think we should do, but that's
Yeah, I know.
for discussion.
So I think there are, if the people are willing to register this as an inclusionary housing and put it on title as an inclusionary unit, the city won't have to monitor it as much, but I think that that might be a way to then justify giving some bonuses here. And bonuses may be reducing the parking requirement from the 1958, 1978 requirements.
If we can do that.
Well, we can, yeah, you can. Inclusionary bonuses trump local law. So.
I hope that's true.
Just so I'm clear, are you suggesting applying the density bonus law to waive the parking?
Well, I think we're writing our own.
Kind of,
Not a
or-
density bonus, but a bonus of some type, a bonus.
An affordable
bonus.
unit
An incentive, okay.
incentive.
Based similar to the density bonus on inclusionary housing for multifamily units.
Whether or not we can extend that to relieving the obligation of a parking space, which is what they do in Piedmont.
Right.
I think it's a great idea. Whether or not we can do that in, the fact that we have Measure D on the books, I think is a sticky question, but I like it.
Yeah, I'm trying to give a way that we can justify some of these items, and I think it's through the inclusionary bonus.
Because that's going to be one that is a common deterrent, more than many of the others. But I think, as Ann noted earlier, being able to have cars parked in tandem is going to help a lot of situations.
Well, I know, I mentioned this before, I know our state legislators watch our show religiously. So it may be the state needs to pick up this banner and run with it as far as inclusionary housing on single units.
Did you have?
I'm done.
You're done. Stacy, did you have any comments?
I do. So I had a follow-up question with staff about, so in the final draft, we are identifying secondary units as accessory buildings, and so they would fall into the 6-foot spacing from the main structure, or are we saying that they're a totally different beast and that they would have to be at 10-foot spacing?
In the past, we've followed the 6-foot provision, and I believe going forward, we would continue to use that same development standard.
Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So that's accessory structures, but an inclusionary or secondary residential can be attached to the main structure.
Yeah, we have seen attached, in a lower level.
And then, this is an education question for me. Who regulates inclusionary housing? Who identifies what those rents are, what that would be in Albany? Who establishes those numbers?
Yeah. We're going to do that, and it is more work for us, but that's what we have to do to have an affordable housing program.
So
in
it's
the city.
Albany that does it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're doing that for the units that we do have, and we're monitoring them now, and we do those calculations now. So it's just part of what we'll be doing a little bit more of in the future, but that's okay.
And then, okay, so I had a couple comments. One was in the wording, it says limiting to 1 bedroom, I guess, for the accessory buildings. And I'm curious as to why we would limit it to 1 bedroom. I agree with the complementary design guidelines. In the contrast, we were talking about Commissioner Arkin's comment on the materials, the exterior materials. I also agree with the 0 lot lines, especially since so many garages are actually built like way back in the corner. And it seems that with a second unit, you're going to want even more usable open space, since you're going to have more members, more either family members or more people living on the lot that are going to want to have access to usable backyard. That to allow those buildings to go all the way to the back corner seems seems that that would be a better organization of the lot. That 3-foot setback, what I find is the next door neighbor can rent that 3-foot setback for their I'm sorry. Oh. Sorry,
We're fighting a bug.
There's,
Bug up here. Apologies.
we have a friend flying around. One that I had is the 15-foot height limit that we were talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong about the math here, but usable space is 7 feet, and if we can squeeze a 1-foot floor sandwich, and then we have another 7 feet plus a roof, it might be more like 16 feet. And so we might want to bump that up by 1 foot. Otherwise, everyone will dig down a foot if we end up going with a 15 foot. And then, I'm sorry, that was all. That was all I had to say at this time.
Okay, I'll just make a few comments, and maybe more like questions also for my fellow commissioners. Yeah, I also wondered about the one-bedroom limitation, whether or not that was necessary. I am undecided about whether or not we should include the R3 zone as well as R2. I don't have an opinion on that. Height limits, am in general inclined to be more flexible with them, or as flexible as possible. I liked the Berkeley model of allowing greater height if you have a greater setback. So I wonder what other commissioners might think about that. Very interested in having a bonus for those willing to make affordable units, or some sort of inclusionary bonus. However we can get that done, yes, that would be great to do. I'm very much in favor of allowing a 0 to 6 inch setback with no windows, as Commissioner Arkin was a proponent of as well. And I think his idea of exceptions for, or rather that just referencing the design guidelines, the residential design guidelines, rather than compatibility with the main unit, would be appropriate as well. And I think that's all my comments. I just would throw back that one question, I guess, to my fellow commissioners, and maybe to staff. The limitation of 1 bedroom, is it necessary? It seems like probably in many Albany lots, you couldn't possibly squeeze in more than 1 bedroom, but is the actual limitation necessary?
It's really at the commission's discretion. If you want to take that out, we can certainly do that.
Was there a reason why it was added, do you know?
Well, what we found actually, it wasn't specified within the secondary units ordinance, but it was in the definition. And so taking that glossary definition, just putting it in the code for consistency, but if you prefer, we can also omit it and not have that restriction.
I would prefer to omit it.
So take it out?
I mean, I've got a
That's,
600 square foot rental unit in my backyard with 2 bedrooms, and it was perfect for, single parent and a child.
But that does bring into question then the parking, because the state law talks about...
State law doesn't apply in this case.
Okay, we can, yes, right. We can be less restrictive than state law, correct, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Who was about to?
well, I think that's, the 1 bedroom restriction's only for an R1. Because in an R2, R3, you're allowed to have more bedrooms.
Why would we limit it?
Huh?
Why would you limit it?
I think the idea is that you don't want it was nice that, you've got a family, but what if it's 2 college-age students living in this thing in a 2-bedroom, in an R1 where they've got 2 cars, plus the cars for the main house? I think the concern was the amount of traffic that a 2-bedroom rented out to college students, as opposed to a single family or single parent. And I think that's an R1 zone, which is really a residential zone, where an R2 is more of a density. So if you want to have this, have it in an R2 and R3 zone if you want multiple bedrooms, but if you restrict it to a 1-bedroom and an R1, because the impact of a 2-bedroom unit may have on that zone and the neighbors.
I have a neighbor with 4 cars, in an R1, and they have a single-family
Yeah.
house, and so you can't prevent the cars from showing up. So I think I still would be an advocate for not limiting it to one bedroom. But I wanted to go back and talk about, we were talking about the 8'6" height for the garage at the lot line. And I'm curious even why, even at 9 feet, it still seems low. If we're looking like this elevation right here, the door on the right 6'8", so it's about 7 feet. And then you add another foot and a half. It still seems pretty low for the lot line. So I'm curious why we aren't talking more like 9 or 10 feet.
Well, this is for structures that are right on the property line.
Yeah.
They're in that 0 to 6 inch, and so they are, from the experience of a neighbor, they're more like a fence. And I think 8'6" or 9 for sure is about as tall as I would want. I actually have one.
Oh, you do?
Next to my building and
You have a
next
mural
to our
painted on
backyard.
it?
Oh, it's this wonderful peeling paint patina. But in any event, I wouldn't want it to be much taller, frankly. And I think that's pretty true for most people who don't have an accessory building or dwelling unit in their backyard and want to have, usable area. But as I said earlier, I think a blank wall is more preferable than a weed-filled 3-foot strip with a window in it.
Well,
And a
I guess
6-foot fence.
I'm thinking of the garage that used to be on our lot and the garages that are adjacent, and I think that I'd be curious what the kind of the standard height garage, the historic garage in Albany is, if that, it seems like it's more than 8 feet or 8'6" in height.
I agree with you, 9 would be a good figure, just for
10 seems
modern
high.
construction and insulation.
Yeah, is there a consensus around that? 9 feet
Well, no,
sounds reasonable to me.
9 feet on a flat roof, you gotta have parapet around it, so yeah. But then again, if you argue that if you're following the code, you need a 30-inch parapet on a property line wall for fire requirements. Or you have a fire-rated ceiling or roof. So that's where it kind of gets into a funny little area where if you're gonna use this as a living unit, less than 6 inches, less than the setback requirement, then you have to have some type of requirements for parapet and,
I think that boils down to clever design.
yeah.
Intumescent paint and fireproofing technologies that are yet to come.
Well, stepping back to the parking for a second, I think that if you're given the trend towards younger people driving less and the trend towards more people using alternative transportation more, I'm less concerned about the parking and with room in terms of removing the one-bedroom limitation. And but I'm also in favor of the 9 foot, raising the 8'6" to 9 feet.
Yeah, we point at Berkeley, but the funny thing about the Berkeley height limit, that's an average roof slope height. It's not to the ridge. So where most jurisdictions go to the ridge with the height.
Mm-hmm. So do we have consensus on things that we needed to give input in, or are we still looking, there's still some things that you need clarification on, staff?
I think we have a number of revisions we're going to have to make, but
Okay.
they're all clear.
Okay.
Would you want to read those to us so we can vote on it, or?
Yeah, actually, I think that would be good to make sure
Okay.
that we're not
Yeah.
missing anything and we're
Thank you.
understanding
Does it make sense to try to include the affordability provisions in this round, or should we maybe wait for the next housing element and revisit those? I'm just trying to...
Well, I think they're going to come back with, this is going to be heard, discussed, we're going to give you direction, and then they're going to bring it back, so we can include that when they bring it back.
Okay.
I mean, the staff.
Is there a reason to not include it now, David?
Oh, I was just thinking of moving it forward.
Oh, okay.
But we can move it forward with.
I would be concerned about that now, because was it part of our notice? I mean, does it fall in the, because this is something new that we've not talked about.
Yeah, I think you're still fine. This is not your formal action. This is just your resolution of intention. And so with that, you're
Okay.
welcome to direct us to make changes as you see appropriate.
Okay.
And then when we renotice this for you to take formal action with a recommendation, we can include that as part of the language.
Okay.
Yeah.
It would be nice to get this package done for a few years and not have to come back to it again in another year or two.
Mm.
We can get this all, just, we have plenty of
Okay.
other things to be working on if we can, so.
Was there anything else before Ann was going to read us the
I
list?
take back my recommendation.
Was there anything else before Ann was going
No,
to?
I'd like to hear from Ann.
read us?
I'd like to hear
Go
from
ahead
staff.
then.
Okay, so eliminating the compatibility standards in the current code and making reference to the residential design guidelines, bumping up the height up to 16 feet, allowing a 9-foot height maximum when you are within the 0 to 6 inches of the lot line.
So
Looking at the, oh, go ahead.
if I may, would we make that common to both accessory buildings and the secondary dwelling units? Yeah.
Eliminating the bedroom restriction, is there, I don't know if that's, still requires further consensus. And then coming back to you with language regarding a program that would, with income restriction, there could be some incentives in place for a property owner to pursue a secondary unit. Should they elect to income restrict the rent on that unit? And then the allowing second units in the R3 zone, the wish of the full commission.
That seem like the right list?
Did we decide to go to 9 feet on the lot?
Yes.
Is
Yes.
that, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I missed that.
And so that also means that, was there a change that the second accessory buildings can go to 0 to 6 inches, but it would be a change for secondary units to be able to do that as well, right? Yeah, okay.
So if you go 7 inches, you can go 16 feet.
Yeah, you wish. There's a 45-degree
Yeah,
daylight plane that's in your way.
yeah. I want that clarified. That,
Well, I think you're either 3 feet or you're between 0 and 6.
right,
You're not at 7. I think the
Right.
code's pretty clear about that.
right.
Yeah,
No, I want to make that perfectly clear that what we're talking about is,
all right. Okay, so, good. It sounds like we've got consensus on the direction. Then we do have to vote on the resolution. The resolution just states that we intend to implement amendments to the planning and zoning code, and that we will finalize those at a later date before we pass them along to the council, if I summarize that correctly. Okay. So, any further discussion before I call for the vote on the resolution? Okay, calling for a vote on resolution 2014-01, intention of the City of Albany Planning and Zoning Commission to initiate amendments to the Planning and Zoning Code relating to secondary residential units. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry, we need someone to make a motion and second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Perhaps you make
first
the motion,
meeting.
but-
so
Who
moved.
will move?
Okay.
So
Move
moved.
a second.
Somebody second it.
You got a second? Okay. Now I can call for the vote.
Do you
All
need
those in
us to-
favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you. All right, that finishes previous business. We're on to new business, item 7. Item 7A, the residential, speaking of secondary residential units, this is about an Amnesty program, and this is our first discussion of such a thing. And would staff like to speak to this?
Yes, similar to your last item, second unit amnesty program is included in the 2007-2014 housing element as part of your policies. An Amnesty program would apply to second units in the city which have been converted or constructed without city-issued building permits. And a policy of this sort would allow the current property owner to legalize the unit through a defined procedure. In going through some city records, we learned that in 1989, the City Council amended the municipal code by establishing a one-year time period for property owners to contact the city and legalize an existing second unit for which there was no previous record. At that time, a use permit was required, as were the payment of the application fees. These fees appear to have been included, business license, capital fees, landscaping and lighting, sewer, school district, and county tax assessor fees. Letters were sent to property owners, responses were received, inspections were conducted, the files were updated, and use permits were approved for a total of 15 secondary units, which were legalized as part of that effort. As of 2001, records indicate that there are a total of 46 legal second units in the city created through the use permit process or determined to be legal nonconforming. Of these 46, the 15 Amnesty units from 1989 are included. From 2001 to the present, there have been 17 additional second units. And actually, I wanted to just add a footnote in checking our records. Just this year, from January 1 up to the present, we've approved four secondary units just in the first 5 months of the year. So this is certainly something that seems to be popular. In your packet, we included the City of Menlo Park, which did a Amnesty Reader document, and it was a compilation of Amnesty ordinances from a number of cities, including Sausalito, San Carlos, some cities in Southern California, as well as Pacific Grove and Fairfax. More locally, cities which have adopted policies include Mill Valley, San Rafael, and Piedmont. What we found, we're just kind of looking more broadly of key components before proceeding with an ordinance. Establishing a program term. 2 jurisdictions chose an ongoing program, and 2 chose a program which had a time restriction, giving property owners a defined time with which to legalize their units. Some jurisdictions established eligibility requirements. They require the unit to be constructed prior to the adoption of the housing element. And the owner reside in either the primary or secondary unit. Older units, for example, built prior to 1978 are exempt from most fees. For non-conforming units, the units are required to comply with all current building codes. The Permit Review Authority, some permits are reviewed administratively when the regulations are satisfied. Others are reviewed by the Planning Commission where there are issues satisfying the regulations. And the review process varied based on the size and location of unit and the conformity with regulations. Some jurisdictions, with respect to the fees, reduced by 50% or waived fees for those seeking to legalize. Some charged the full freight and did not elect to waive the fees. And others had a specific permit fee plus development fees for the legalization process that was unique to that. One thing that came across loud and clear is that all jurisdictions require only 1 parking space for those second units. So with that, we welcome any feedback you want to offer, having looked through the material in your packet, as to how you might want to shape an amnesty program, what level of review you would like to have, whether it be staff level or to the Planning Commission, or assigning that based on circumstances.
Any questions from the Commission for staff?
Well, I noticed you provided a list in the staff report that was approximately 60 properties, but in the report itself, it makes reference to there being about 120.
Yeah, we found we need to get kind of our records updated. We found an old spreadsheet, hard copy, that we weren't able to locate electronically, and then we have more current records. Our intern this summer will be making a complete master list of the full number of units that we have, so we have a hard and fast number.
Yeah, I know our firm has been involved in 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
One is very recent, but the other 2 were within the last 20 years, and none of them are on this list, so I was just curious. And I suppose it's possible someone built it with an approval from the planning commission, but they never got a business license to be able to rent it, renting it to a family member for free or something. So it's not on the books. Got it.
Any other questions for staff? Stacy? No? Okay. All right, I'll open this for public comment. Anyone wishing to speak to this item, please step forward at this time.
Catherine Sutton, Albany resident. It seems that one of the problems that we're having here is not enough affordable housing, and I'm sure there are a great number more secondary units than you have on your list. I know there's one in my backyard. It's not used as a secondary unit at the moment, but it has been in the past. It's one of the ways that you could make it attractive for people to, and would it make it attractive to people who have these units to waive certain, whatever penalty there might be for having something that's illegal, to make it really affordable. And I do want to here just say that when we're talking about affordable, we're not talking about affordable in the, as the law of California says it's affordable, but really affordable. Like affordable for people who don't have a great deal of money or no money. I'm not being very clear, but that's all I wanted to say.
Alexa Hauser. Again, I'm really happy to see this come before the commission and begin its journey to becoming a reality. From my perspective, and I too support the idea of maximizing affordable housing in Albany, to support a more diverse community and to do our fair share for the county, the region, the state, and the country at this point. So whatever we can do to through an amnesty program to encourage people to make their units safe, affordable, countable, would be terrific. And so, not surprisingly, I really like the idea implemented recently in Piedmont for the same kinds of flexibility that you were talking about on the previous unit. And it makes sense to me that people would be exempt from zoning and most other city regulations, but not building codes. So the safety issue there. So thanks.
Thank you.
Peggy McQuaid, and I do still live in Albany. I have to agree with the other two speakers. I think the two key points for me are the affordability, and as Catherine said, it's not the legal definition. It's housing for people with no income or very low income, and also keeping the safety aspect of all of this in the forefront of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wish to speak on this item? Seeing no more public comment, I'll close public hearing and bring it back to the commission. And I would just ask, I forgot to ask this question earlier, but maybe now is the appropriate time. Unless I'm wrong, you've just presented us with a bunch of information about how other cities have done this, but you haven't given us any specific recommendations at this time. Do you have any? Is that deliberate that you wanted our input first before you formulated your recommendations, or?
Yeah, I think that the thought was that we would go to you first and kind of get some just general ideas about how you would want to proceed and then craft something more specific.
Okay, thank you. With that, who would like to start with comments? Stacey?
I can start. I think this is a great idea in concept. My concern would be life safety issues. And so, in looking through the secondary dwelling amnesty reader from the other cities, it's based on establishing when the structure was built and what codes it was having to meet at that time. And how do we establish when it was built? So I think there should be some rules about that. If it's, can't be anecdotal, or maybe a neighbor can come and give testimony, or,
It's on most property records.
Okay. Well, if someone had constructed something not on property records, I guess, is that what would that be allowed to be turned into a, if they had built something illegally?
I would say it depends. For example, the project that you looked at the beginning of our meeting has 2 illegal units that fail to meet the current ceiling height requirements of the building code, and as such, that's an example where there's no way that we would be able to legalize it because it was done without permits and it doesn't meet codes. There would be obviously some significant construction involved to resolve that. If there was a unit that maybe was done without permits but does have legal ceiling height, does have egress satisfied or can be satisfied, I think we could look a little more favorably at that situation.
So are we going back and looking at tax records? When you say on the record, it's when the property was sold, when
We have permit history here on all properties in town. For some projects, we are able to locate second units. In other instances, there is the rare occasion where we aren't. There's the even rarer occasion where property owner actually drives to the county and they're able to get their original permit history and in fact show us that permits were issued. We simply didn't have them in our record.
At the end of the day, we just kind of try to use common sense. Sometimes kind of through archaeology, if you will, you can look at the plumbing fixtures or the electrical wiring and say, well, this was probably done in the 50s or the 60s or the 80s or whatever. But one way or the other, the safety things are the main thing that we would be worried about. And it's the emergency egress, it's the smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, fire separation from other structures, so forth.
Anything else?
No, I was just curious how we were going to establish that. Thank you.
David?
Well, I think it's an excellent idea and an opportunity to educate folks about the possibility that they could do this. I think many are under the impression that they can't. And so while we're rolling out Amnesty, we could roll out, a campaign to encourage. I think the purpose, which we've been discussing, is that we have that the city has a better understanding of how much housing we are already providing in our city, and that in turn informs our regional housing obligations and gives a better picture of the even greater density that we probably have that we didn't even know we had. I think in a lot of ways it is advantageous to the property owners. It adds value to the property, certainly at the time of sale. The safety of tenants has been brought up, and that's a very important one. And I think it also makes it safer in the fact that one suddenly can't have their use ceased because someone files a complaint that says, hey, they're renting out their garage. So there's a lot of good reasons for homeowners to want to be able to do this. I had a number of questions. One we already talked about, which is the numbers that are being tossed around. Are sprinklers currently still not required for structures that are less than 1,500 square feet? Okay. Because that could be a potential deterrent for folks. And the only other question I wanted to discuss was, you mentioned many of the programs have a 2-year time limit, and I wondered if we just want to have a program and it allows it to happen at any time. Granted, if we put a time limit on it, if it weren't for the last minute, nothing would get done applies. People might actually be incentivized to do something, but at the same time, we will have a need after that 2-year period. So just wanted to put that out for discussion, the advantages. And then finally, is Amnesty really the right program, or is it simply a secondary unit registry or licensing or, you know, legalization?
Sorry, don't quite get that.
Yeah.
What are you saying?
I'm just wondering if amnesty is the right word.
I think that's what I was
Oh.
responding to, that it's somehow that these are illegal and that we're going to allow them to now be, you know, that they're.
A friendlier word is what you're looking
Yes.
for. I see.
In reality, we don't really fine people for this. When they come in and say, we got this thing, we need to legalize it, we just say, okay, here's what you got to do. There's not an extra penalty. We're a little bit more solution-oriented already. So it's not like they're going to go to jail and we're keeping them out of jail kind of amnesty. It's just helping encourage them to do what we'd like them to do.
Right. So you're agreeing that amnesty may or may not be the right word?
It's the term of art that's used, but it's not, when we don't consider them criminals or something like that. And so we probably wouldn't normally use the
Nor
word.
are they imprisoned or being tortured.
Well, maybe a little torture sometimes, but.
It's you.
Did you have further comments, David?
No, that's enough for now.
Okay, Phil?
Yeah, I think that this is a great start. I think we need to proceed with this, make it an outreach program. I kind of agree with David. Amnesty's, maybe we should come up with a more friendly term of let's get out and vote, or let's get out and register the units, and show the people the benefits to registering units. You know, so I think that that's a good thought. I want to beg the indulgence of the commission, because something came up in my reading of these ordinances I made a note of, and it should have been on the previous one. And it's something I feel strongly about. We've talked about inclusionary. I want to step back for a sec with the indulgence. We talked about the financial impacts of having inclusionary housing. The one thing we didn't talk about, which we should have, and that's some type of bonuses for making the unit ADA accessible. ADA kitchens, ADA bathrooms, ADA path of travel should be something that we want to encourage as part of the bonus situation. That's it. I just wanted to add that back in. As far as the Amnesty program, I think it's great. I think we have an outreach program that's going to help. We're going to have to figure out how to reach not only the landowners, but real estate people that put these on the market. I don't care if it's a finder's fee of $50, come in and help us register the unit and get a $50 bonus, you know, or something, a discount in the transfer tax. Something that may happen that we could do at that point. I know one of our, I don't know this for a fact, but I know transfer taxes can be quite expensive, and if we give a slight deduction, maybe that'll encourage people to register the units when they come in. So those are my thoughts. I think that the units out there are units out there. I think people need to be encouraged to register them and not think that there's some big brother reason why we want them registered, so we can supervise or overview them or overlord the secondary residential units. So I think that that's a friendly reminder, plus the benefits of having those units registered with the city.
All we want to do is make sure they have electronic smoke detectors.
Yes.
And a carbon monoxide sensor.
Well,
no, I think, Phil, I like your idea of adding the accessible unit as a part of the affordable program. One could do one or the other and gain an exemption if it helped.
Yeah.
And in many ways, to create an accessible unit, having it be a little bit bigger, given the need for turning radiuses and whatnot,
right.
would be helpful. I wanted to note, if I could add in to my comments that the city of San Carlos's program, out of all of those that were included from the Menlo Park study, seemed to be the best model. Not word for word, certainly, but I like that it's 3 simple steps, that it outlines, you know, what the process is, what the fees are, what the inspection checklist is going to be, and it does it all in 3 pages. It's really nice. So I don't know how others reacted. Sausalito's form was okay. The others became unnecessarily complex really fast.
Yeah, so my comments are pretty brief. I'll say that I think we all agree that safety issues have to be dealt with in any such program. Whether or not there's a time limit, I think is probably up to staff as to whether or not they can afford. Well, you know, maybe it's not an issue if you're doing it anyway. If people come to you and have to legalize, maybe, you know, that you don't have to put a time limit on this amnesty program, if we call it that. But I'd be interested to hear if you have any opinions on 2 years versus just a continual program. I do think that amnesty, I don't know, so there is I think Jeff was pointing out that there is a real issue in that people who don't have legal units, their rental can be shut down. So that's the one big penalty that people might not realize that they have if they don't have a legal unit. So so maybe amnesty is an appropriate thing to so that people understand that there is that issue. And finally, I would just if San Carlos has a simple plan, I think simple is good. I note that in the staff report it says that in general, those cities with less stringent regulations and reduction or waiver of fees and fines seem to experience greater success in encouraging owners to legalize previously unpermitted secondary units. So I think that whatever gets us to more success in allowing people to step up is better, and something that's simpler is probably easier for staff to deal with and implement, and will also allow for us to turn over turn more units into legal units. So those are my comments.
I'd like to respond to your first question. I think from our perspective, we'd actually like to have this as an ongoing policy. And just to give you an example, we had a house recently turn over that had an illegal second unit. You know, in terms of how it was constructed, it satisfied actually the parking and setback requirements when the house was on the market. I spoke to probably 4 or 5 interested parties who knew from the disclosures that it was done illegally and inquired about the process of legalizing it. And in fact, it did get legalized. But I think it's good to have something that we can refer to on an ongoing basis, particularly if housing stock turns over, and there is some very genuine interest, I think, given the prices of our housing stock, to make sure that everything is done lawfully.
So is that in response to the 1-year limitation period that Lafayette has? So you're saying not set a time frame, but...
Yeah, I think we should allow it on an ongoing basis, because if we have turnover in our housing stock, we may have occupants who see the incentive to legalizing it and using it as a rental unit.
Maybe we do a fee reduction for free smoke detectors or something for the first 2 years to really inspire people
in fact,
to get
with
on
this,
it.
we did do a fee reduction because they were processing another application for the main residents, so we charged them half the original fee.
I apologize. I said Lafayette and I should have said Fairfax.
Any further comments, opinions, direction to staff?
None for me.
Well, if none, then I think you didn't require formal action on this item, and if you feel like you have what you need from us for now, we'll move on to the next item. So, and the next item is our last item of new business, the discussion of potential wireless policy amendments. We've previously reviewed potential changes, and we're reviewing it in this meeting as well. And would staff like to speak to this?
Yes. For this evening, this is a discussion merely as a follow-up to what we reviewed a year ago. So we've prepared a PowerPoint to walk you through what you're looking at this evening, as well as potential changes that you may consider going forward. So to give you some history, the city's ordinance was adopted in 2005. In 2007, we all became somewhat familiar with smartphones. In 2009, the FCC established shot clock deadlines for application processing. This restricts the time frame in which an application is reviewed. In 2012, a new section of the Middle Class Tax Relief Act requires approval of modifications to existing facilities. We've had some applications that you've looked at, so I believe you're familiar with this. And then most recently in 2013 and 2014, refinement to the wireless ordinance has been on your annual work plan, which has been presented to the council, and the council has identified this as a project for your review. To give you some history on other applications that we've had in recent years, we've had the 423 San Pablo application, which is an existing legal non-conforming facility. We had an application to do antenna replacement. It was appealed to the City Council in 2011. The denial by the P&Z was upheld by the council. We ended up in litigation with Verizon, and as a result of the change in federal law, a building permit was issued for the replacement, and it resulted in the settlement and withdrawal of litigation against the city. There's a Verizon facility at Golden Gate Fields. The application was actually denied by the Planning and Zoning Commission in 2010. That was appealed to the City Council, who then overturned the decision and approved the facility, which was substantially built. 1035 San Pablo was an AT&T application, which went on for a little over 4 years. The commission moved to deny it. It was appealed and upheld by the City Council. Again, we ended up in litigation, and a revised application was submitted, and the facility was constructed. And last year, you looked at an application also by AT&T at 1495 Solano Avenue. The commission approved it. It was appealed to the City Council. We were sued, and then upon final action by the City Council, that litigation was withdrawn and a building permit was issued.
And if I may, just point out that that's a partial list, that there are a lot of other applications that were on there that were approved by the commission and subsequently built.
Well, some of the other applications that were reviewed, you looked at antenna replacements for both Sprint and T-Mobile at St. Mary's. You looked at a Metro PCS microwave dish at 650 Cleveland Avenue, and most recently, you looked at a tower at 520 Cleveland Avenue with a Sprint and soon to be AT&T facility. On March 18th of last year, the City Council officially directed the Planning and Zoning Commission to review the city's wireless ordinance for amendments. On May 22nd of last year, the Commission reviewed some suggestions that we put forward to you, and you made recommendations as a result of that. We're coming to you this evening in part with those changes, but also as part of your review, you had made suggestions which require further refinement before we can incorporate that into the draft ordinance. So for your review this evening, we're asking you to do a few things. The first of which is to review the proposed changes in your package, and then also make changes as appropriate. Determine if wireless facilities should be permitted or prohibited on utility poles. There's some language in the code. You've never looked at an application of that sort, and that was actually something that was identified last year during your review, but we didn't get a conclusive answer, so we thought we would ask you to weigh in on that. We'd also like to ask you to confirm if wireless facilities should be prohibited entirely from residential districts. In going through the code, in particular section 202100 D1, there is some language that does give a little bit of an outlet to a carrier if they were to site in a residential district. It's our feeling that it'd be prohibited entirely, or if you're going to allow it, it'd be more specified. But if you are going to prohibit it, we recommend taking that language out of the code so that it is solidly prohibited from residential districts. We've also provided a summary list identified as potential commission changes, which you identified last year, and that's what will require some additional feedback before we can make changes. So to give you an overview of the changes that have been made, we've eliminated the application submittal requirements. Last year, the Commission supported eliminating the restriction of wireless facilities in parks and schools. You also eliminated having preferred districts and simply allowing them in the particular districts without any preference. You asked us to establish antenna replacement provisions and review procedures. Most recently, at your March 26th hearing, we went to you to confirm if the zoning clearance process was working for antenna replacement. You confirmed that it did, and that you want to continue to see those as commission agenda items, which we will continue to do. One of the other things that you identified was amending roof coverage threshold requirements, and in the draft, we've eliminated the reference to the rooftop coverage section elsewhere in the municipal code. You also asked us to simplify findings within the code. We've made some minor language changes, though it could be refined further. And as I mentioned before, we've included language in the code establishing the zoning clearance process for existing facilities. A question had come up about why we eliminated application submittal requirements. Currently, they are codified in the ordinance. I consulted with our city attorney on this particular issue, and the thinking was that when this was originally crafted, by codifying it, it applies the same standard across the board to all carriers and avoids a discrimination argument. But due to the unique nature of each application, we often find that we're requesting information specific to each request. And as it was explained to me, it can kind of cut both ways. While you have uniform requirements and you request more information, it can also be construed as being discriminatory because you're not then asking for everything across the board. And taking those provisions out of the code eliminates any argument against discrimination because it's not codified. It's not part of our local requirement. We've found some provisions in the code that created a little bit of ambiguity. I've highlighted them here on the screen. As I mentioned before, we're asking you to weigh in on residential districts and the prohibition of wireless facilities in residential districts. There was some language in 2020-100D3 which specifies a maximum achievable setback. We already have specificity for a minimum of a 50-foot setback, so we're asking you to take that out and just hold to the 50-foot setback. There's also a provision that creates an exception to the development standards. We're put in there that be omitted as well. In going through the code, we found multiple references to two issues. The third-party review, which we do as standard practice for all applications, whether it be an antenna replacement for a legal non-conforming facility or a new facility, and we are proposing to continue doing that across the board. It was listed in 3 different sections. We've just included it in one since we are doing that as a matter of practice. Additionally, we noticed noise being referenced in multiple locations, and we have refined that and referenced it in one section with cross-reference to Chapter 8-1 of the Albany Municipal Code, which regulates noise. As I mentioned, you identified a number of potential changes in your review last year. So on page 3 of your staff report, I'll just read through this. There were a couple ideas that were discussed, but not necessarily developed any further than these talking points last year. The first one was to establish requirements for wireless carriers to submit a 5-year master plan to the city in which they would detail their anticipated search rings, and that was intended to prevent sort of a piecemeal application, not knowing where carriers are looking to locate. Rather than having applications trickle in, we would have some indication of what to expect. You asked for better definitions of upgrades and enhancements to existing facilities and what would be involved, and I think, given where we are, we would want to work on that a little further. There was a recommendation for base station generator design to be integrated with design and landscape standards. I think we'd, again, be looking for more direction. A suggestion was made to include language in the code that should specify that the applicant shall produce the least powerful output necessary to provide the coverage that they require. And there was another request that the applicant shall provide quantitative data to provide required coverage. For both of those things, I think we'd need a bit more specificity, and then come back to you with language that hopefully, if you decide to go down that path, would address that. Visibility to the public from ground and from standard viewing points being defined in design review. City-sponsored monitoring of existing facilities. And one thing to note, in the time since our last review, the city did go out and did take measurements with our third-party consultant of existing wireless facilities. You received a report in your packet September 11th of last year that affirmed that all the facilities that we visited in the city that are on air are in fact compliant with the exposure levels. It was also suggested last year that outside peer review could be done at staff discretion. As I mentioned before, we do this as standard practice, and as such, we've left it in the code and haven't proposed any changes to that going forward. As I mentioned before, we would like you to weigh in on utility pole antennas and whether or not that's something that is acceptable, and if not, crafting language that prohibits it. The wireless facilities in residential districts and eliminating ambiguous language. And then there were a few points that we wanted to remind the commission that including, with the changes we proposed, you still retain revocation. It's contained in a different section of the code, but it applies to use permits. So you always have revocation authority should there be an issue with a facility. As I mentioned, we did the wireless monitoring to ensure compliance with exposure regulations. And even though we've proposed eliminating FCC requirements within our municipal code, these facilities are still required to comply with the FCC requirements. That's a condition of the license that a carrier is required to obtain through the FCC to have an on-air facility. With that, you did receive some correspondence today regarding this particular issue. We're certainly happy to answer any questions that you have.
Yeah, I'll note that we received correspondence today and yesterday, I believe, as well. I have one question from early in your presentation. 1495 Solano, was that the, for lack of a better term or for an identifying term, was that the Sunnyside Cafe?
That's correct.
And there was I don't recall there being a lawsuit in that, but there was one.
There was. What happened was the project was appealed. As you know, we go on recess during the month of August. The carrier has 30 days from the date of the planning and zoning approval beyond that to basically preserve their rights under the shot clock. So what they essentially did was, knowing that we had the hearing looming, they filed litigation against us. And they were prepared to amend that had the council outcome gone against them. They basically did that to preserve their rights, so they had something in the courts to allege a shot clock violation against the city.
Okay. Okay, and that was due to the fact that it was appealed. Yeah.
It was appealed, and that appeal put them out of the 30-day window.
Okay, got it. I didn't recall that. Thank you. So are there any other questions for staff on this item before we go to the public?
I was unfortunately not at this meeting, and because of my proximity to St. Mary's, I can't listen in on the St. Mary's comments and have not gone back and watched them. So I'm curious about the allowing antennas to be in parks and schools, and I'm curious what the conversation was around that, and it might be something for my fellow commissioners, but maybe if you remember what it is, you could provide a summary.
Yeah, and actually, I may rely a little bit on Commissioner Moss because, as I recall, he and Commissioner Donaldson discussed the issue quite a bit. And I think, I remember Doug saying that, with St. Mary's having a facility, he thought the public schools should have a right to also generate revenue from having a wireless facility.
So it's more about opportunity and
It had more to do with revenue than anything.
And we can't really say that the Albany School District can't have a cell tower. They are a state organization under state jurisdiction.
Right. I would expect that they would process the application within the school board process for putting in a wireless facility.
We can say we don't like it, but they don't have to listen to us.
Right.
Well, currently, though, we do prohibit it. Yeah.
Well, we say we do, but
Okay.
they have every right to ignore us.
I see.
We don't do design review on schools.
Okay.
It's all processed through the state.
That's true. Any other questions for staff?
Well, I'm in complete support of trying to remove redundancy and everything else, and I think what you're saying by removing the submittal requirements is we make it more like a building permit application for anything else, is that we have those submittal requirements and they change based on technology and what's appropriate and all that. So I'm in full support there. I'm just wondering if there are any specific issues that you're experiencing that are other than those that are driving these changes.
No, I think, as I mentioned, this has been identified by the council. Given the exposure we've had to litigation in recent years, I think there's some concern that cleaning this up and making it, a little more condensed, maybe better. Let Jeff weigh in on this.
I would just say during kind of that period of time in 2011, 2012, maybe early 2013, when we were in a series of these hearings, and I don't remember off the top of my head exactly what the time period I was looking at, but it consumed roughly, I think, 30% of our work effort in the planning department during that extended period of time. And I felt like that was out of alignment with where the city council and the commission, the city manager wanted us to allocate time and energy. So, and some of that has to do with the procedural requirements of the code, and some of it just has to do with the controversial nature of the issue. And we can't do anything about the controversial aspect of it.
And if I may, I believe a lot of it has to do with some of the specifics on some of the applications that were received. Some where people built illegal penthouse space on top of their building and exceeded their allowed coverage, and then wanted to add a cell tower in addition to that. So, and that's completely a zoning issue that's outside of, it's related, but it was not specific to this section of the ordinance, for example. So, I think there's a perception that the cell ordinance is the problem, and I'm not sure that that's entirely true. I think that there are opportunities to streamline it and remove redundancy, as we were saying, but in many cases, it is not the sole source of the issues.
We don't expect these changes to eliminate the potential controversy with the future application.
But I think having clear definition in a lot of areas, and I think a number of the communications we've received have encouraged exactly that same thing, that we try to provide more clarity. So, okay, we're saying the same thing. We'll get more into this.
Any further questions, or should we move on to a public hearing? So I'll open the public hearing on this. Anyone wishing to speak to this item, please step forward.
And I'll take speaker cards.
And speaker cards would be greatly appreciated. They're in the back with pens for those who want to speak.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity. My name's Sarah Sunstein, and I live in Albany on Dartmouth. And I admit I have not had a chance to read this whole draft proposal. It's really long. And I'm also relatively new here. So I've missed a lot. I've been here fewer than 3 years. So, but what I do notice is that there's a lot of bullying going on. There might be redundancy in the draft, in the ordinance, but it seems like the big companies, if you say no, they call on their lawyers. You know, that's a problem. And it's something to do with capitalism. It's something to do with the inequity. And to say that we have to change our ordinance because there's a lot of litigation, an ordinance that was put together with a lot of input and a lot of thought. It's not about bowing to bullies, to capitalist bullies. I'm not against capitalism. I'm against the way it's the more money you have, the more rights you have. And it doesn't hold water in a supposed democracy, and especially a little town. Let's have the people speak. And as far as schools and parks and residential areas, it's not a place for cell antennas. And parks, I don't want to go in a park and have cell antennas there, and the hum, and the radiation. And also, the little bit of the revisions I did read, it looks like that you're not going to be inspecting regularly, monitoring the radiation, and that the replacement assessment is only about the size, but not the number, not the amount of radiation. What if it increases? What if smaller antennas, as technology changes, has increased radiation? Another piece is, and I always say it, I am very sensitive to Wi-Fi stuff. I come in here, I get a headache within 5 minutes. I have some drops I can take that help, but not everyone is able to tolerate this stuff. And the FCC limitations are sky high compared to other Western nations. I shouldn't say Western, developed. The EU, Israel, many other countries have way stricter limitations. And what I can say is that Hillsborough has...
If you could finish up.
Yeah. Hillsborough has requested of the FCC to review all of this, to review the limitations, and to review health information that keeps coming up. And I would love it if you all would look at that and considering signing on to that Hillsborough letter, and I'm happy to get a copy to you all.
Okay, thank you very much. I apologize. We would like everyone to limit their comments to 3 minutes, if possible. I'm not going to be completely strict about it, but I have to be somewhat strict in fairness to everyone who wants to speak. And I would note, and I apologize again, I meant to say this earlier, that we're not taking any formal action tonight. There will be other chances to speak to this item as well. But that said, I welcome others to come and speak. Do we have some speaker cards that we want to call out?
I don't have any others at this
Okay.
point.
Was anyone? Okay.
Hi, David Sanger. I live on Evelyn. I think you've heard me speak before on this subject. And we all remember the context in which this has arisen is the multiple lawsuits and the continued obstruction by a small group, which has led to an inordinate amount of staff and zoning and time on the commission and population. We do finally have some reasonably good cell service for some carriers. I'm glad to see the preferential zoning going. It's led to no end of discussion and useless arguments. I think it's really best to let carriers decide the best site for serving the customers within the context of our guidelines. I'm actually particularly interested to hear why P&Z is willing to continue the residential restriction. What is your rationale for continuing the prohibition of cell sites in parks, schools, and residential areas? I'd like that to be sort of clear. It seems to me that if you lifted that, then any proposed site would still have to be subject to all the other provisions that you have on noise, aesthetics, safety, emissions, every aspect of the zoning would still have to be, of the ordinance would still have to be met. The city of Gilroy was brought up in some correspondence you saw about sunsetting non-conforming uses, and I took a look at their ordinance. They take a very simple approach to the permitting. They have 4 different kinds of areas: residential, commercial, publicly owned property, and open space districts. And for 2 of those, commercial and open space districts, they don't require a conditional use permit. They only require the architectural and site review. For the residential areas and for the publicly owned property, they require the use permit. So that was the city of Gilroy's approach to it. I would like to see you address the possibility of having DAS systems on utility poles. Those are usually done by the carriers in areas where there's rough terrain and they can't get reasonably good coverage, like the Berkeley Hills. But as Ann said, it's possible someone will propose that in Albany. So I'd like to have at least thinking about a context of how you would deal with a network when it comes in. 5-year plan is interesting. I'm not sure that a startup carrier is going to want to reveal their full 5-year plan to you, but I understand that it can be helpful in getting a rough idea of what the build-out plans are. These are competing businesses, and they may only want to reveal so much about their plans, and obviously they're subject to change in the business environment, but it would make sense to me as sort of a non-binding guideline as to what they anticipate. For the routine maintenance, I think there's an issue with Section 6409, which basically says that you can't, you have to approve eligible facilities request for modification of existing wireless tower if it doesn't change the physical dimension. That's the FCC. So I noticed the new language is a little unclear as to how non-conforming uses would fit within there. It seems to be fairly strict in Section I2. So I'd like to be clear how that's handled.
If you could finish up, please.
I'm finished.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
The next speaker is Carol O'Keefe.
Good evening, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Thank you for the work that you've done. I support the changes that are listed. I want to speak really to only 2 points. Oh, and I want to express agreement with Mr. Sanger's comments, so a second to all of those. One is a little more elaboration on the possibility of establishing requirements for these 5-year master plans. So long as there are no concerns, follow-up, or problems if the 5-year plans change, I would say fine. If they give you a general idea, it's worth it. If something doesn't pan out to be that way, then it should be very clear that that will not be an issue for the commission, because the nature of the industry is such that things change very rapidly. Would be the minimum, at the minimum, what I would hope the commission would expect if that does become part of the requirement. Also, the notion that there should be language in the code that the applicant should produce the least powerful output necessary to provide the coverage they require. Why? Why do you care? What difference does it make so long as they meet the FCC requirements? If we get better coverage, where's the harm? I would say that that is essentially a non-issue unless there's some information that somebody can present that identifies that there's a benefit for us. Otherwise, it's just more time, more things to talk about. If they meet the requirements that the FCC has set for safety and for Albany's aesthetics, that should be sufficient. So I would suggest that absent any other information, that should not be a component of our ordinance going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Clay Larson.
Clay Larson, Albany resident. In the PowerPoint presentation, you characterize this as refinement. I would characterize this as an evisceration of the current code. I counted, and there were 11 sections that were totally omitted. I could read the comments that corresponded to those comment numbers. I would think for each large section that we're omitting, we should have a better analysis that shows that in fact the current requirements are redundant, and they're satisfied in some other way. I didn't see that. I just saw just kind of a capricious proposal to omit them. A couple of them bothered me. In the opening section of purpose and intent, we want to eliminate the language that requires the provider to demonstrate need. In fact, federal law supports the city's ability to require that these are necessary facilities. So I don't see why we eliminated that language. We've also eliminated the alternatives analysis, but federal law provides that the provider should address things like coverage gaps with the least intrusive means. So if we don't know what the alternatives are, I'm not sure how the commission can ever make that judgment. You found the language maximum achievable setback to be vague. I found the elimination of every straightforward height requirement, 10 feet above the maximum for that district. It's being replaced with the height of the personal wireless service facility shall be based on a visual analysis demonstrating the views of facilities are minimized. What does that mean? It's vague. It would much preferable to have specific height limits. Decide what they should be, but listen. In general, on several instances, we eliminate third-party review. I know Ann said that it's retained in one section. Perhaps she can provide the committee and the audience that section, because I must have missed it. I did see we eliminated it several cases. And the general argument was, and just in case you don't find it, the general argument was that we always do it anyway. But I suspect we do it anyway because it's referenced in the zoning ordinance. So we should retain it at least somewhere. The language, I think the zoning clearance option is unfortunate. It includes, it uses, it qualifies a project based on the absence of facility expansion and negligible size difference. I think those are vague terms. I think the general philosophy here, because I'm running out of time, is that we're going to replace some specific requirements with this kind of notion that it's all going to be solved in design review. But these things are ugly industrial appurtenances, unless they're totally camouflaged, which is great when that happens. They're going to be aesthetically unpleasing, so we'll never approve any of them, but the federal law doesn't permit that. So I think the notion of substituting specific requirements with some kind of general design review approach, which staff has indicated is the wish of the commission, I don't think is wise.
Thank you. Anyone, any further cards?
I don't have any other cards at this moment.
Does anyone else want to speak to this item? One more card.
My name is Kim Kitano. I live in Albany. Lived in Albany for 22 years. One of the reasons why I like Albany and have lived here and enjoyed it is because I feel that the City Council and people at large are responsive to comments, and I appreciate that. I feel that the current ordinance that you are revising or looking at, I'm worried that some of the key components are necessary, and the one that I'm particularly worried about is the one with schools and residential areas. And so I would encourage you to really seriously consider what you are possibly dismantling. And I believe it's important, not just because of revenue, because that's what it sounded like that was in response to. I think that there are other ways that we can generate revenue other than that. I think that it's important to look at health. I think it's important to look at safety. Thank you.
Thank you. We had another card.
Catherine Sutton.
Catherine Sutton, Albany resident. I'd like to add my voice to the people who recognize that this is new technology that is untested, that there was a time when we believed cigarette smoke was harmless, we were told very distinctively and very repeatedly, and there were very clever advertisements that proved to us that cigarette smoking was harmless, and it took a long time for it to become known that it wasn't. The news that our FCC requirements are much less stringent than other countries worries me, because we know that our government is paid for by corporations that provide wireless technology. So while I know that this is a small city and a small piece of all the cogs, I encourage you, even though it has been made, even though they have said that you can't deny these things for health reasons, very clever, right? Stick to your guns and please don't be bullied. Thank you.
Thank you.
Heike Abeck.
Hi, I'm Heike Abeck. I think most of you know me already. Barely made it. I have a busy life. I'm glad I made it, though. I'm very concerned about this changes in the ordinance. I'm kind of frustrated that I have to keep coming here to bring up my concerns, and I feel like they're not being heard, but I will keep trying. I'm not going to give up. I must say I was very disappointed to see the changes that are proposed. I feel like I have fellow people in the Planning and Zoning Commission that have similar concerns as I do about my health, the Albany residents. You know, I feel like you respect the same things I would respect. You know, I ride my bike, I try to keep my family healthy, and then I see changes like that in an important ordinance for the city, and it just makes me mad. But I want to speak to some things that I don't like and that I'm hoping we can not change in this ordinance, because I do think it's important. I also want you to know that I was a resident at 1037 Keynes. I spoke up very vehemently against the cell towers across the street from my house there. I moved away from that house since that because I did not feel safe living in my house anymore. And I now live on 711 Pomona. I'm still an Albany resident. I love living in Albany, and I hope I can continue to live in Albany. So the things that I don't like about the changes is that I think you're proposing to allow cell towers on schools and adjoining parks. I now live right near Albany High. The next thing I know, you're going to put a cell tower on Albany High, and you're going to allow AT&T and put one there. And then what am I going to do, move again? That's just me personally, but I'm concerned for everybody in the city, all the students at Albany High. It's to me, it's just frustrating to hear that we're going to allow that. Then you're also going to no longer require them to monitor to the emission limits that the FCC actually enforces. So to me, that's almost saying you're going to be more lenient than our federal government on this. That it makes no sense to me why we would not at least monitor to the FCC limits. And it seems like you're going to allow them in residential areas. I wasn't quite clear about that. And you're going to no longer require the cell companies to show that there's a need for the coverage to be there for Albany residents. And this is actually, I think, a big concern because the cities surrounding us, like Berkeley, has pretty strict requirements. So I'm afraid if you're gonna no longer make them justify why they have to put a cell tower in Albany, they're going to put cell towers in Albany. And yes, we're going to get the revenue, but we're also going to be the butt of it because all our residents, maybe in 20 years, will have health effects from it. And I agree it's not allowed, we're not allowed to discuss it, but I think it's a big concern, and we don't want our Albany residents to be the butt of that 20 years later. So I really want to encourage you to not make those changes, and especially, have Albany have cell towers for the Berkeley residents and the El Cerrito residents, just because we want to change our ordinance.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. Anyone else?
No more
speaker cards. One more.
David Rose.
Okay, so as you know, my name's David Rowe. I live at 1325 Thousand Oaks, right across the street from the high school. This You've met my wife. She can be a little fiery, but I love her for that. Yeah, that's my wife. Okay, so I'm an old Marine and an old Vietnam veteran, and I'll let you know why this is important here to me. My MOS was a radio telephone operator, so I was exposed to RF radiation, and I was trained in the handling of it. And I'll tell you right now, RF kills. In fact, in this, RF kills, and in the training for the radio telephone operator MOS, they even killed some rabbits with RF coming from the antennas that you see on the backs of Jeeps in war movies. Okay, now I didn't have one of those, but I was attached out as a forward observer for a mortar platoon. And so in doing that, I was exposed to a lot of it, and now I have a hypothyroid condition that's tied directly to that RF. There's a lot of things here that I object to, but as you say, I'll get some more time to object to them. But right now, the one that I'm mostly concerned with is the schools and the residential areas. And I saw that these ones that were displayed up here that were litigated and whatnot, those were all commercial areas. They weren't residential. Okay, so we'll just make sure that everybody knows that. The community spoke to you years ago, several years ago. I've been a 22-year veteran of the cell tower wars, and our preferences were told to you then, and I'm sure that material's all there for you to reference. We did take a meter around and measured the signal strength all over Albany, and there was not a problem when this ordinance was written. And I too believe that these are here for our wonderful Berkeley people that do not want cell towers, but they want to have their cell phones. Okay, so I don't think that we should become a nesting place for other people's health concerns. When I was in the Marine Corps, I was only 17 years old, so I wasn't much older than most of the kids that are in that high school. Now, when they come out and talk to us about the first time, I asked them, I said, how are you going to protect the children in that high school? And they said, we're going to put up a shield to protect them. And I'm going, if there's nothing wrong with this, what do we need to protect them for, right? So I do seriously object to a lot of this, and I'm going to take you up on your opportunities to speak about this more when I have more time to go into these. Thank you very much.
Looks like we've exhausted the cards, and I don't see any more folks stepping up for public comment, so I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. And we've got quite a number of things to talk about. So, is there anyone who would like to begin? Bill?
Don't know if I can cover everything that needs to be covered.
Well, we could take, we could do it in.
Yeah, I'm going to do this. The most important things first. We talk about this allowing towers in residential zones, and that's a non-starter for me. They have never proved through all their simulations that they were required to put up towers in residential areas. In fact, most of their simulations showed that keeping the towers in the commercial zones adequately covered Albany.
Who is they?
All the applications.
All the applications that we've seen. The AT&T, PC Metro, and all the rest that we've seen, we've required all this coverage requirements. Not one of them ever said that they needed to put a tower in a residential zone to make the coverage necessary in Albany and to bleed over to Berkeley. And I do agree. I've seen some of the studies from the Berkeley area that shows that they need to put these towers as close as possible to the Albany border to cover some areas of Kensington and Berkeley. And so there's going to be bleed over from some of those areas that cover Albany also. So I think there's no reason for us to even consider allowing towers. I think that's something that we should just say, it's a small town. It's not like some of the other larger towns that have longer distances across town. Our town does not have that, and I don't see a reason to include that. I agree. I think that I'm concerned about the visual aspect of the limitations, so I think and Clay I agree with Clay. We need to come up with an exact measurement and stop making this a guessing game and overburdening the he say, she said issue of what's important on a visual impact or what's not important. Let's take that off our table. Also, the idea that we really do, and I've said this before, the monopoles, if they're going to start putting up monopoles, we need to come up with a better design review, and that is one thing that we can review. How they're hidden, how they're built. I'm afraid that part of our ordinance encourages monopoles with multiple facilities on them and co-locations, and that just encourages the poles to be bigger with more carriers on it. So I would want to really look at that also. How that requirement of co-locations on monopoles affects the design or the structure. And obviously they always want to get as high as they can, but I'm not sure that that's the best use of a monopole. Sorry. I'm curious. I would like to look more into this utility pole micro transmitter station. I'm still one of those people that have hopes that someday the city will actually underground the rest of the electric power in this city. And how would that affect having a pole with no wires to it except an antenna on it? So many years ago, we had money. We had paid taxes to have the electrical underground in the city of Albany, and unfortunately that money ran out and they could only do part of the city. So I would like to get more information on what we're expecting to allow, by allowing these units, or the request to allow these units on utility poles. As far as the school district, we have an issue there. I don't think that we actually are entitled to say yes or no to having it on a school district property. That's up to the school district. I would encourage the school district not to allow them. I was not happy when the St. Mary's decided to put theirs up. I spoke against it. I thought it was a bad idea, but St. Mary's got the necessary votes to allow it, justifying that there was no harmful radiation coming off of those that would affect the students. And we set up a strict monitoring program for that. I don't know if that monitoring has been kept up, but they were supposed to take readings at different locations around the campus to verify the levels of RF. So, yeah, I think that if any, I would like to keep in the necessary requirement, the needs requirement, to prove that there's a reason why. I'm not sure about the 5-year program because fortunately technology changes yearly, and the 5-year program will probably be just a fairy tale anyway. But to at the time of application, keep the needs requirement in there. And that's kind of a thumbnail of everything. If you want to talk more, I can. But.
Stacy?
I wanted to start by saying that all of us are parents. We either now or at some point have had kids in the Albany schools, and I feel fairly comfortable that we want our kids to be safe. I think it was brought up earlier that that we don't have the authority to determine whether a antenna goes on top of the school because and you learn this when you have to take your architect's exams, but the state reviews all of the drawings for schools, and that's to apply consistent level of safety. In this case, I did have a question for staff because I know that Marin, they're throwing some ideas around about replacing that building. So early on in the process, will the school district work with the planning department? Will they come to, for kind of ideas about locating the building on the lot No. No. So it's hard, I'm sorry, I sat in the heat all day today, and my mind is just numb, and I'm trying to keep it together for tonight. But, so they will design and implement the entire process outside of comments from, okay.
Well,
So-
let me clarify that for you. Yes, the school district will hold their own reviews and input. They'll probably have a committee that will look at the designs, and at that committee level, they'll take input. It will not come here.
Okay. So it sounds like that there was some dialogue about that since we don't have authority to regulate that anyways for schools, it shouldn't be in the language here, except for potentially private schools. And so then we're talking about St. Mary's. And in St. Mary's, I feel like since the parents are paying for the school, their vote is, they could choose to not go to that school. They could choose if they felt that it was unsafe for their kids, and that they're going to be advocating for their kids. And so with a parochial school or a private school, it seems that they should have the right to be able to do that, and that's their choice. And then the parents could choose to not support that school if they didn't like what the direction the school was going. As for residential areas, I thought that Commissioner Moss's comment about wanting to underground the power lines was interesting. I'm in support of that as well. There will be streetlights, though, continuing throughout Albany, and I am interested in keeping some language open for, and I don't know what the correct term is, if it's a repeater, the smaller amplifiers, because maybe now they're not the right situation or the right technology for Albany, but it could be that down the road, as technology changes, that they're having kind of a field of very low-powered repeaters is going to be in our best interest, as opposed to having these highly, these much more powerful amplifiers kind of in single locations. And so I don't want to limit us to be able to kind of shift if it feels like the technology and is changing, that gives us the opportunity to change with it in our best interest. So that would mean that we would have to allow for those to be in residential areas, and so I don't know if that's something that we prevent now, and then we have language in it that says, but in the future, if something comes forward, we can vote. I don't know. I don't know how that gets written into the language. I was curious if the master plan that we're asking for, if other cities have asked for that as well, if that's coming from feedback that you've gotten from other planning departments.
Well, I know San Francisco, and I say that recognizing that the scale of San Francisco and Albany is quite different, but they do require that the carriers submit 5-year plans to them with their anticipated build-out. That way, when they have applications that they submit, it doesn't come as a surprise to the planning department, and they have something on file that if residents are interested, they can always refer to that and see what may be proposed for their neighborhood.
So has that been in place for a while? And I'm curious to hear, has it been successful? Have the utility, the cell phone tower companies actually submitted those? And
They actually have to submit that as application completeness. So if a carrier doesn't have a current one on file, they are required to have a current one on file. And I think in some ways it actually, at least, again, given the scale, it may help them look at their build out, a little bit more big picture. I think what we found here, we get an application from one carrier at one location, then another carrier at a different location, and there doesn't seem to be as much continuity, and there certainly doesn't appear to be coordination. So we tend to get more of a piecemeal processing.
So they're not balking that San Francisco is requiring
No,
this? Okay.
no. And I this may be speculative on my part, but I think they generally have an idea of where they're, they have dead zones within the city and where they need to get coverage.
Okay. So, what I was wondering in the language for the residential areas is if we would ever put in something that says we don't approve of the higher powered antennas, but we could be open to other technologies that come along down the road in a residential neighborhood and make it so the language so that there's some flexibility in it. I don't know. I'm curious to hear if any of the other commissioners put some thought into that. So, okay. I may have some other follow-up comments, but I think that that's a good place for now.
Good start. Okay. David?
Yes, well, let me begin by saying how sorry I am I missed the May 22nd, 2013 meeting where we discussed this last. I was off riding my bicycle. And clearly there were some things discussed that I would not have agreed with. And let me just itemize those here. I think we need to keep a prohibition of cell towers, not allow them at schools, at parks adjacent to schools, or in residential areas. We've discussed our limited ability to possibly regulate public schools, but it doesn't stop us from saying it, and we have other schools in our community. So I think we should just be clear on that. I know that's counter to the direction that was given a year ago, but that's how I feel strongly about that. I think we need to keep our monitoring requirements. And as others have discussed, demonstrated need, I think that's one of the more useful parts of the applications that I've reviewed, is seeing what areas are currently covered and what areas need to be covered. So I would want to, as a planning commissioner reviewing these things, and for planning commissioners into the future, I think that's one of the most useful tools that we get. I think we can continue to encourage co-location, but it should be clarified that we want to co-locate at conforming existing facilities. We have a lot of non-conforming existing facilities that we're, finding ways to continue their use. But if they're a non-conforming facility, we should actually be looking to sunset those. And I think that should be somehow woven into the language of this ordinance. I agree with the comment of Clay Larson, and I think Phil backed this up, that we should have a specific height limit above a maximum height limit, a specific number. I think they are still very much subject to design review, and if we could come up with ways of encouraging better design and artfully integrating these things into our landscape, that would be better. But allowing a tower that's 20 or 25 feet higher than the height limit actually gets these facilities further away from people and probably out of more of the things that block the coverage. So I would encourage a higher height limit for these facilities than what we currently allow, which is 10 feet. I think as part of our design review, we should not require without exception, screening of antennas. There are some installations which could actually be better if they simply integrated those antennas with the rest of the structure. I'd like to remove the prohibition on unscreened antennas. That's not to say that in many situations screening is the most appropriate way of having them. I just think we should have the flexibility of, if we're in the context of our CMX zone in an industrial area, something that's a little more raw and industrial in its nature could be appropriate. Third-party review has been very helpful to the projects that we've reviewed, and I understand that that's still required in this revision. I just wanted to make that clear. In terms of the prioritization, I agree that that has caused more headaches than been helpful, so that we can let that go. And similarly, the study of alternatives. It seems like we have exhausted the list of alternatives. We know what they are. So that part of it is on the more less helpful side of what we received as part of our applications. I think we should well, I've already mentioned that. And at the risk of approaching that 30% staff time spent on cell issues, I think a summarization of where things are moving within the code that makes it clear that something is either being eliminated or it's being collated into another section. I think your notes do that fairly well, but it would be nice to have a very succinct document outlining that members of the public can see that we're not gutting this. What we're actually doing is making it easier for everyone involved, including members of the public to use. And I think we should probably talk about some of these things further so we can provide direction.
Yeah, there's one item that you mentioned, I'm not sure any of us covered yet, was utility pole antennas. And that was in any district, or specifically in commercial districts, or any district? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, I think certainly if you continue to restrict facilities in residential districts, this wouldn't be an issue. We did have an inquiry not too long ago about utility poles in the public right-of-way. Given the way our ordinance is structured, it would still be subject to a use permit and design review. But I think we would want to affirm with you, it still applies to those permitted zoning districts. And it would be a new type of facility you would be looking at.
And that's a facility where there's just an extension of the utility pole with like one antenna on top, something like that. I know that I've seen an installation in Berkeley near the BART track, or on the Berkeley-Albany border on Santa Fe, right near the BART tracks. It seems to be something of that ilk.
Yeah, it's typically where they extend the height of the pole and put an antenna on the top, and they may have a receiver on the pole as supporting equipment. It's a much smaller scale installation, but because it is smaller, I think there tends to be more of them. I can tell you in El Cerrito, for example, they had 5 different applications for pole top antennas.
And do you know, is this the DAS technology that?
In El Cerrito, it was DAS technology. I'm somewhat familiar with the one you just mentioned in Berkeley, and that's actually a standalone facility. It doesn't need to be installed in conjunction with those other antennas.
I see. Okay. And I think other than that, I think we did hit on a lot of the things that staff wanted us to talk about. So yeah, let's have some discussion. Let me just throw in a few comments before that, though. I am kind of interested. Well, I guess maybe just a couple of thoughts. I would love to hear the school board's input, the school district's input on this before I decide whether or not to change any of our language regarding schools. I don't feel like I could move forward without that, or move forward in good conscience without that. I do like the idea of sunsetting non-conforming existing facilities. That would be high on my list. A higher specific height limit sounds great. One question about the unscreened antennas. The installation on San Pablo across from UC Village, did we... I believe it came up that we approved that without screening, or with and that was allowed. We were able to make that exception in that case, even though our language requires usually screening. So maybe our language is still, David. Maybe our language is still okay with regards to that. We don't have to change that. I just say, just a very general comment. It seems like I think it's important to keep in mind some of the bigger constraints here, the bigger things that are driving some of these possible revisions, which are that we're worried about litigation, certainly. We're worried about staff time in processing applications. I heard that. And I think we do want a streamlined process as much as possible, as we do with any of our processes, so that we can process applications in a most efficient manner. So those are some of the things that I see going on. And to the extent that we can leave items in that do not put an undue burden on staff or do not have the potential to cause problems or delays of applications, I think maybe we want to still leave those items in. That's kind of my thinking at this point. So, all right, let's discuss some of these items more. Where did we want to go?
Well, let's start with schools, parks adjacent to schools, and residential areas.
Okay, good.
It's interesting. I was thinking that if this was to shift, if we were pulled the language out, that it would then become the responsibility of the school board and the superintendent to allow or disallow, and it's interesting. It's just an interesting idea that shifts kind of to their plate.
Seems like that makes sense.
I think we could just say schools, and then they can determine that their schools aren't our schools if they feel that way.
Yeah.
Prohibit schools, but,
yeah.
Language, but with the understanding that they can ignore it.
Well, as far as I know, there's no intention to put a cell phone on a school in Albany at this time. And I have.
You might not even know about such an application, I guess, right? So I'm not sure we know. I know.
But wouldn't
there
the
was
school board
one
and the
proposed.
superintendent, they would know about it, wouldn't it? I mean, it's not something they could sneak onto a school without.
Yeah. Well, I have some knowledge of this because there was one of the one thing that caused people to spring into action at one point was a proposal to put an antenna on Albany High School on one of the higher tower parts close by the main staircase there. And the school board, I was at a meeting where the school board discussed that. And so they were considering a proposal by a carrier to do that. And one of the reasons that they were interested is because it would give them revenue. But people were concerned about the fact that this would be a cell antenna at a school. But the school board certainly, I think, would, I would imagine that they would see all such applications, yes.
Well, okay, so Commissioner Arkin is recommending that we continue to keep the language in to prevent schools. So how does that work with St. Mary's then? What if they want to upgrade or add towers?
Those facilities would continue to remain legal non-conforming. So to that extent, we could allow them to do maintenance, but they certainly cannot expand their antenna arrays. They can't introduce new carriers at the site. They're strictly limited to maintenance.
Okay. Would that cover preschools as well, or are those not considered?
I don't know as we have any that are in the public facility, the PF.
Yeah, I think most of our daycares we have a number of home-based daycares, which obviously wouldn't, they're in residential districts, so they wouldn't have
But
that.
if there was one, a school and a Solano
Solano.
commercial or San Pablo commercial, they would be prohibited.
Yeah.
They would be, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's what this language would.
Okay. I would be willing to support that as well.
Support keeping the language about schools.
Keeping the language in.
And parks adjacent to schools?
Is that the language, that it's parks adjacent to schools, or is it all?
That's what it's currently, that's what it currently
Well, actually,
states.
right now it's schools and parks, and the issue of park came up about 2.5 years ago when there was some discussion of putting a facility on Albany Hill and the code amendment that would be required to allow a facility in a public park.
So that seems like a location that could be a good place for a cell phone tower because it's so far removed from where people are living. So it may be that parks we want to review individually. We might want to keep that language. I don't know.
I don't. I'd like to hear other commissioners' speak about this, but I'm not sure about the prohibition in parks. Why would we keep that in?
Although parks adjacent to schools, so Memorial Park, if that's not technically part of the school campus, I would,
Yeah, Memorial Park and Ocean View Park, which is where, I know Ocean View Park gets used by Ocean View School. It's sort of a adjunct playground for them, and similarly, Memorial Park for the high school.
Well, maybe the idea or maybe the thought is that all of our parks are either adjacent to schools or residences. So the only Albany Hill Park would be appropriate. Is that
Well, by a process
fair
of
to say?
elimination, that's where we'd likely end up.
I don't know.
But there's
East-
still a school up there.
Pardon?
There's still a school up
But
there.
it's not adjacent to the park.
Yeah, well, at what distance do you count not being adjacent? An effective distance?
It's either not sharing a property line or a opposite side of a street.
As far as I know, there's at least one street between.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm getting at, is I think if we're going to do this, we need to be more specific on what we're talking about as far as adjacent.
I was going to suggest that should we just specifically name Albany Hill Park as a
Exception?
As an exception.
All parks except Albany Hill Park, I'd be good with that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I'm racking my brain. If are there other parks that we could be missing right now that would be also, should be considered as well? So Terrace Park, Memorial Park,
Only if there were new parkland at the waterfront, I guess.
waterfront, right? What about like Pierce Street, if they had an antenna close to the highway that was away from the residences, Pierce Street Park?
Well, the park is adjacent to residents, so I might not be in favor of that, if we're using that qualification.
Well, all of the parks are adjacent to residents.
That's true. That's true. Technically, that's true. It made me think about the waterfront, though, of why we, that would be, well, I'm not sure we want to go there.
Well, I think we approved one at Golden Gate Fields in spite of the prohibition at the waterfront. I forget how we did that exactly, but I know we did.
We did not approve it.
You didn't approve it.
The commission did not approve it, and it was
The council
appealed.
approved it on appeal.
The council approved it, not the commission.
Well, that's why we didn't approve it. There you go. We follow our own rules sometimes.
So do I still hear consensus that Albany Hill Park might be the only place we'd be okay with that? Uncertain consensus.
Well, I'm just wondering, there are private properties up on Albany Hill, so, that are not near residential, that are zone residential.
All right, well, maybe parks are out too. Schools, parks, and I'm not hearing any support for residential.
Well, help me out here. I remember looking at some of these maps, and when we suggested putting an antenna up there, didn't the companies come back and say, no, that's not a great place to put it, or?
It wasn't great for their current coverage requirements. It's a feasible site. They may come back in a couple of years and tell us that now that their bandwidth needs or frequencies are changed or something, that they would like to do that. In fact, we've been approached. At the same time we're doing the analysis of Albany Hill, we did an analysis of this facility, and subsequently, recently, we've been approached by a carrier who's interested in exploring with us the possibility of something here in the Civic Center.
So if a local group, such as the Lions Club, owned a sliver of land on Albany Hill and wanted to put a cell tower on that, it's not technically in the park. It's on their land.
It's zoned park, I believe.
It's an easement?
Sure.
I thought they owned it.
Public facility.
I don't know the
Bad
details.
example.
That particular one.
You're right, we're getting maybe a little too specific here, but
Another way to look at the park situation is maybe just pick a distance from residential uses, existing residential uses, and you say 100 feet, 200 feet, whatever it is. And so there might be in some of the parks something that works in a particular location. And maybe we just need to go off and study that a little bit and try to come back with something that works for Albany Hill that wouldn't work for the other parks.
It just seems to me that the density,
we can give that direction, I think.
the density of a park, the number of people that are there, it seems much less than a dense residential neighborhood or something along Solano or something along San Pablo, where you have kind of a higher density of people working and living. And so maybe locating these in parks is actually a better place to affect less people. I don't know.
Well, parks tend to be a transitional place where residents, you're spending more time at, so you're not getting the exposure that you would at your home or... Anyway, sorry.
Right.
So are you agreeing or disagreeing?
Yeah.
Well, no, I personally disagree that no, I don't want it
In a park?
in a park.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with, making the prohibition specific to parks adjacent to schools, and then it's really going to be up to the city council to approve the installation of a cell tower in any other park, and they're probably not going to put one in Terrace Park. They're just not.
I agree.
For example.
Yes.
So let's just, frankly, without getting in any trouble, let's just leave it at what we're talking about, and that is don't be specific sites, just let's say not recommended for parks adjacent to either schools or residential areas. And if
Well,
somebody
every
wants to,
park is adjacent to a residential area.
Right, true. But we're not spot zoning saying this park, that park, or any of this other park.
Well, but what did you think of the idea of making the proximity of naming a proximity like 100 feet, 200 feet away from residences? In that case, if we could do that, then it would be okay in a park.
And if somebody wants to build on one of those lots up there that's within the distance to the cell tower, I don't know. I'm just saying that
It would be based on the zoning map, so it doesn't matter if it's built on or not.
well, the way to do this is really, let's just say 500 feet from a residential property line. So they could place it on Albany Hill, but it would have to be 500
That's
feet,
nowhere in all, we just eliminated all of Albany.
except for the hill.
I think the hill's eliminated too. If you look at a zoning map, there's actually not a very big park up there.
Okay, 200 feet. But my point being that we could come up with a distance that it works, but that keeps it away from. But at 200 feet, do you bring into play other parks?
This is a block, right? That's 200 feet.
Mm-hmm.
The width of my finger. Why don't we leave staff with some direction to get creative?
Yeah, I think we've got the gist of the conversation, and
Thank
so we
you.
do
I
some
like that.
Yeah. get
measurements and
creative.
give you some choices.
So moving on to residential, I didn't hear any support for location in residential, nor have I heard that there was an issue with a lot of applications for residential antennas.
You know, it's possible that there will be an evolution in the technology and smaller, lower powered, more widely distributed antennas are going to make sense. But that's not the case today, and I don't want to base an ordinance on that possibility today. I think if such a thing becomes widely used and proven to be a superior technology for everyone involved, including people's health, then we'll revisit our ordinance at
Yeah, I
that
was going to
time.
say, that's exactly the way it should be worded. Just when different technology or new technology
We don't even
becomes-
have to word it, we just,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, we leave that loophole that we review it on that basis.
Yeah, okay.
So that would include the pole tops that are adjacent to residential areas?
Right.
I think so, yeah.
If there's a benefit to bring them in over the big cell towers, then we can review it.
So that covers schools, parks, and residential.
Do we, I put out a number of either 20 or 25 feet instead of 10 feet for the potential height of a tower in a commercial district above the stated height limit for that district. Any comment, discussion, agree, disagree?
I think that makes sense in the CMX zone. I'm not sure. Just envision this like cluster of, you almost have like a little forested area with all these poles, and they're all 25 feet high above the adjacent buildings. It might be a design issue along San Pablo and in Solano.
It's absolutely a design issue.
Right.
We're not saying that, you will automatically get your project approved.
Okay.
But we're saying that it won't be any taller than X number.
I think you had a great argument that it does put the antenna farther away from people.
I remember when AT&T presented, they had prepared all the various studies, and they said if they were to put an antenna on top of the Department of Agriculture building, I believe it was going to have to be something like 100 feet high. And I was thinking, great, let's build it there and save it along Solano or San Pablo. So,
We could go ahead and just say 10 foot, but if they want to go 25, come up with a design that is interesting, or so we just don't get monopoles. We get something that either is hidden, is Eiffel Tower shaped, I don't care, but, something that's different.
So start with 10 feet, but give them the flexibility of going higher if they present a design that is worthy of...
Exceptional design?
Exceptional
Just as we
design.
require on residential?
Yeah.
I like it.
Sure, I support that. It doesn't mean that at 10 feet or less you can propose substandard design, but I think requiring, a little extra effort for a little extra height is appropriately communicated.
And it might lead to fewer constraints. They might be able to actually build something nicer than if they're limited to 10 feet, or something that makes more, they've got more options.
There was discussion about the screening language and removing it, and I think we should keep it in initially so that it forces the providers to actually address providing a screen and presenting a design for us. If we don't have that in there, they're not gonna want to put that effort into it.
I brought up our language, and this must have changed from what we were initially discussing, because as I read this, it does not require screening, unless it's one of those things that occurs in multiple locations in the ordinance, which is altogether possible. But this reads, building mounted antennas and any ancillary equipment, let me pronounce that correctly, shall be in scale and architecturally integrated with the building design in such a manner as to be visually unobtrusive. Screening may include designs such as locating within the facility within attics, steeples, towers, behind and below parapets, or concealed within a new architectural addition to a building or structure when it is architecturally compatible with the building. Then goes on to say, when antennas and other equipment are viewed directly against a building wall, colors and materials of the equipment shall be painted or otherwise treated to match the exterior of the building. So it's not clear if they're really required or not.
Well, there's another section.
Oh, of course. Thank you, Jeff.
A couple, it's the General Development Standards, paragraph E, which says screening, and then there are 4 subparagraphs to that.
All wireless communication facilities shall be screened in one of the following ways. That was what I was thinking of when I thought we should eliminate, or we should open up the possibility that unscreened antennas can be allowed if they are, artfully, sculpturally integrated into a proposal.
Unless unscreened antennas are a better design, better,
That's what I'm saying.
less impact, better
Oh, I
design?
see, you're coming up with language, yeah.
Yeah, less impact, better design.
I think on the 1035 San Pablo, you looked at the screening proposals and concluded that the screen was more
Visually
annoying
obtrusive.
than
Sure.
just the raw panel.
Well, if we're being honest here, they didn't put much effort in putting a screen up there. It was horrible effort on their part.
Yeah, and not a great building to start with.
Yeah.
No.
It was a little tab in the middle of the entire elevation, and it brought more attention to itself, and in this case, it made sense. But I think that we should put them in the position of having to present a design, and then our response could be, let's do away with it. Let's just put the antennas up.
Yeah, but the way this is currently written, it requires screening.
So that's all great, but keep in the context in the back of our mind is we have this shot clock that's running. And so we have to have a process that can do this quickly, so that we can process their application. It's a multi-dimensional problem.
Front of the line for a study session.
They already we've already done that. We don't have these sit around because the clock is ticking.
Oh, so this is to help facilitate the approval process, because if they have to come before Planning Commission for every single application I understand, okay, to conceal it, then we have to review that, is what we're saying.
Well, if we have to have special meetings, so be it. I mean, they have to be responsive to their own shot clock as well, right? Isn't there some way that we can give them a week to resubmit, and if they take 3 weeks, the clock is reset?
Sort of, but we try to work with them. We don't like to do special meetings just because we can only get this room. This room is booked every night.
All right. Well,
so anyhow, we'll work some more with this and try to create a process.
My comments are not for monopoles. It's for screening on top of existing buildings, and so maybe there's an in-house review.
how did it, in your opinion, how did it go with the Sunnyside application? Because we had a few rounds of design review with that.
That actually went quite well. We took that to you April 24th of 2013, and they turned their design revisions around in less than 2 months, and they got an approval on June 26th. So, you know, it was a new facility. It was subject to the 150-day regulation, but actually I think that was an instance where it worked well.
So what you're saying is that the shot clock is longer when it's a new...
When it's a new
proposal?
facility.
Okay, well, I think that's what we're primarily discussing.
But as we mentioned earlier, we did end up with litigation in that project because we managed the shot clock for your decision-making process, but then there was an appeal that was filed that ended up getting to the city council. So again, we had the shot clock kind of pressuring us at the end of that process.
So we need to build that into the time frame. It sounds like.
Yeah.
But just so that you're aware, what happens in that time frame is that the carrier submits an application. We have 30 days to deem it complete or incomplete. Once we make a determination, the clock stops. Typically additional information is requested. And until that new information is submitted, the clock is paused.
Okay.
I think in that case, because their application was technically incomplete, for that window, if there was about a 6-week window where the clock was paused.
All right, well, I don't think we're discussing anything unreasonable, given that experience.
Well, I'm confused as to where we are now with regards to screening.
I was wondering if it made sense that administrative review for monopoles and existing antennas, but when a new antenna is being installed on a building that's, along San Pablo or Solano that's near residences, and we want to control what that looks like, it makes sense that it comes before the Planning and Zoning Commission. Does that seem like a reasonable break, or is that going to be most of our applications moving forward?
Most applications.
Okay.
Any other items that you don't think we've adequately discussed and would like the benefit of further direction?
Well, one thing I think that maybe Ann and I need to consult with our legal counsel on is to the degree to which the city can regulate or influence the technology that people use. I think the rule of thumb is that we're not supposed to regulate technology. We're not supposed to, which would be perceived by the carriers, not to defend them, but their perception of that is that we're discriminating against one versus the other because maybe one of them uses a DOS system and the others don't.
In what way are we proposing that?
There was some discussion about whether, encouraging that being open to different technologies.
Some discussion among us, or
yeah,
public
maybe
input,
there wasn't any final direction on that, but
I think we were supporting the prohibition of towers in residential zones because, to our knowledge, there is no better technology. And should such a thing emerge, then that could cause the city to revisit its ordinance. But for now, we're not really open to that.
So again, sorry if I'm not following, but with regards to screening, leave things as they are, or are we to change language?
I'd like to see it changed. I mean, we already have one example where we, did ignore our own ordinance.
Okay.
And sounds like to most people's satisfaction. I was recused on that item, but.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Fine with me. I was very interested in the whether or not we were able to sunset non-conforming designs or non-conforming installations. I think everyone would love to see that monopole on San Pablo disappear. And is there a way we can make installations like that, or at least encourage, perhaps an incentive that for carriers to sunset them?
I think that's a conversation we would have to have with our city attorney before we could give you a solid answer.
Okay. And with regards to monitoring antennas or monitoring radiation in general, does staff have any intention or have any plan for further monitoring themselves? Is it, yeah.
Well, we did monitoring last summer with our consultant, and to be perfectly candid with you, I think that experience went well, and it also gives us an opportunity to conduct monitoring on legal non-conforming sites. For those carriers that establish facilities prior to the ordinance, they don't do the monitoring because their facilities are obviously not consistent with our requirements. But us going out there with our expert who we trust, I think gives us a pretty good sense of the compliance, or if there's any non-compliance. The report concluded that the facilities are in compliance.
Okay. And applicants don't have to pay a fee for that ongoing monitoring at this point, do they? They don't contribute to that cost, the cost of the city?
No, we absorbed that. It was a day worth of work, and we were there. We used the time efficiently. It would probably take us more time to try to collect from the carriers than it would be time to actually do the work. So it just seemed like the bottom line that we wanted was the information.
In terms of leaving in language about FCC requirements, I'm neutral to that. It doesn't seem necessary since they will already be subject to FCC requirements. But you could always leave in a sentence, I suppose, a reference.
And we have. It's in here. Our ability to enforce the FCC requirements is pretty limited. We don't have the legal authority to say cite someone for a violation of federal law. Now,
we can let the FCC know.
We can let the FCC know. If they reach a conclusion that it's in violation, then we can withdraw the use permit or design review or whatever. but the FCC has to do their thing first. That's just kind of basic due process.
Preferred sites, what's the commission's feeling on that?
I think you're referring to the prioritization.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I was comfortable eliminating that.
Okay.
It's my understanding that that's proven to be more of a unhelpful provision.
It does. We don't have any teeth behind it, so even if they're on an unpreferred site, it's not a sufficient basis to deny the application. So it kind of it just hasn't gotten us anywhere with any of the applicants.
Demonstrating need, having the carriers demonstrate need. Any thoughts on that?
Well, as I mentioned, I think it's one of the most useful things we get in an application are the maps that show what their current coverage is, where they're lacking, and where how this facility fills that need.
Okay.
Was that what was proposed to be removed as a requirement, or was it just the language in the opening paragraph?
No, I think that was. I think we're intending to continue to require. And correct me if I'm wrong. Just simplifying the submittal requirements.
Oh, okay. I apologize. I thought that was up for removal.
I think it came up in some of the correspondence.
Okay.
Perhaps.
Well, I think if you look at page 1, there's a comment, allow antennas to be located according to demonstrated need. In the previous discussion, the commission directed us to do more of an aesthetics focus rather, going forward. We can keep that language in, that's not an issue. And this isn't particular to an application requirement, it's the purpose of the ordinance.
That's just, you're referring to how it's stated in the purpose and
Right,
intent.
and we can leave that in, that's not a problem.
Okay.
There's reference to, I'm starting to fade too, there's reference to requiring 5-year plan, and that was proposed to be eliminated, or?
We actually don't have that in the code currently. It's something that the commission could consider, or if you want additional information, we can provide that to you.
Has that been brought up or discussed at all with some of the carriers who you see frequently, shall we say?
I haven't discussed the particulars with them. I mean, I know that it's a requirement in other jurisdictions where they seek to do facilities. I think, though, in the case of AT&T, for example, they filed for the 1035 site. As that was coming to a conclusion, they filed for 1495. As that came to a conclusion, then we had an application for 520. I don't think it was an accident that all of those came in succession of one another, but of course, we don't know that because we're only processing one at a time while they're making decisions on their end. At least, though, we could have had search rings to show where they would expect to locate.
I'm sorry to kind of extend this, but just to add, one of the interesting things about handling these applications, AT&T is the only carrier where we actually see someone from AT&T. All the other carriers, we get consultants who basically have a very narrow assignment, which is, they told me to go get this permit for this location. And the consultant that we're dealing with, generally, my sense is they really don't have a clue what the master plan for the carrier is. And the only time that we would be adding a requirement, which is fine, we can do, but I guess that's my point. The people we're dealing with don't know.
This is a requirement that other jurisdictions have requested. I'd be curious to know if they've gotten anything that was useful.
Maybe we should, as part of this, we'll do a little more homework before you make a decision, so you can really see what this would look like.
Yeah, it's unfortunate to see these things sort of coming in sequentially when a master plan. Or at least, some set of goals of achieving coverage would be, clearer. And at the same time, there's nothing to stop them from saying, oh, our plan's changed. So.
Right. Analysis of alternative sites. I'll just say from my experience, it's provided hardly any value to us as a commission. We get a big document, and I don't see the value of it. Anyone else?
I agree.
You know, they justify their application by using that information. That's all they're doing. Unless we're ready to really analyze every optional site, it's not useful.
I'd be okay with eliminating that.
Well, they're walking in with a relationship already established with either, you know, the building, the owners of the building are willing to lease them, and it's not necessarily true of these alternatives. So it seems, I would agree with Commissioner Arkin that,
I think you're right. I think
Yes.
it actually in some ways works if for an application that the commission might wish to deny, having them submit information that shows there's no other place to do it makes it harder for the commission to otherwise make that decision. Okay. Maybe counterproductive for you.
they go out and find buildings that don't want them
Yeah,
intentionally
exactly.
so that they don't have that option.
Okay, I think we're in agreement on that.
There was one, in correspondence, there was an interesting note about the preference for co-location actually being not getting us the outcome that we want, that it allows for more installations on some of our non-conforming sites. Staff having any opinions about that?
Yeah, I think we agree with that conclusion, that that's something that is...
Yeah, I think we can continue to promote co-location, but only at conforming sites. And it currently doesn't state it that way, but it should.
Well, let's see if I can find the... Oh, okay, yeah, it was about non-conforming sites, yeah. It's about, it encourages use of non-conforming sites. I just want to look over one more document, and I think I'm almost done. I think it looks, from the look of you guys, it looks like we've covered most everything by now. We continue to get correspondence, I notice, even during the meeting. I wanted to look at one piece of correspondence that I got earlier.
Must be you, 'cause I'm not getting any.
Got your email turned off?
No, it's on, I think. Oh, wait, it's in my junk.
I think that does it. Anything else? And so this is an item requiring no formal action. We're just giving direction to staff. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for your comments. And we will move on to the next item then. If I can find it. Here we are. That ends new business. We're on to announcements, communications, discussion, and we do have one item, the Measure D working group update.
Yeah, as many of you know, the working group has been creating a matrix of alternatives, policy alternatives, both that would not require Measure D amendments, and then alternatives that would be associated with Measure D amendments. That matrix, the bug is over here. The matrix is been completed based on the last working group meeting on April 30th, I believe it was. It's scheduled to go to the City Council next Monday, the 19th, for their feedback and direction. I suspect that I would be surprised to have a final decision from the council. They don't need to make a final decision about the 2014 ballot until July. but I expect we will get some feedback about going forward with some of the items that are that don't require voter action, and then perhaps get some direction on whether they want to seek voter action in 2014 or possibly at a later election. So anyhow, that's one of the major agenda items next Monday night City Council meeting.
Three of us here participating in those meetings.
And Nick, were you planning on attending Monday?
Oh, is it Monday already? Okay, probably, yeah.
I will once again be on my bicycle, so I can't be there.
Let me check on that 1 second. Are there any other announcements or communication from staff or commissioners?
Yeah, that's where I'll be Monday. I'll fix that.
I believe I can attend Monday. So no other announcements or communications? Okay. And then, next meeting, May 28th. Is there anyone who cannot attend that meeting?
We'll be doing the general plan update, another work session. It'll be on transportation.
Okay, I guess we'll all be there. Thanks, everyone. And I will adjourn the meeting at 10:15.